Well, good morning, everybody, and welcome to the fourth annual Gynecological Cancer Research and Survivor Summit. Thank you for sharing your morning with us. You could be doing a lot of different things on this Saturday morning, so we appreciate you for being with us today. I always like to start these summits by telling you how it all came to be. For most of you who are on the call, know that I am a ovarian cancer survivor since 2013. I got involved in patient advocacy because I truly wanted to learn why ovarian cancer was so difficult to prevent. I started participating, like many of you and many of the survivors that you're going to hear from today, and national advocacy organizations that you will also hear from as well. I attended conferences to learn more and to ask better questions about clinical research. Many of those questions are going to be posed by several of the presenters here today. But the most important question that I asked was to Dr. Nita Lee, who's our co-chair today. And that question was, will you help me create a space where patients and their care partners and other survivors can learn more about the work that each of us do, where patient advocates can learn more about researchers, and they can learn more about the science. They can be in a space with other providers that are not their own, so that they could learn more about the medicine side of ovarian cancer. And she said, sure. And that's where we're here today. Literally 1 week before the world shut down, we started our very first annual Researcher Survivor Summit. And so I'm just so humbled and so proud to see that I still have all this support of the researchers and providers, health providers, that help us pull this summit together and provide this information for everybody on the call. So, Dr. Lee.
Thank you so much. I think, yes, I think you summarized it well. The purpose of this event and how we distribute what we learn here today and how you guys all share what you've learned and what you participate in today is to really understand that this is a group effort, that this is not something that I think we do better for improving both the lives of patients who have experienced a GYN cancer, but also in terms of prevention, survivorship, research in basic science, in translational science, and clinical research if we're doing it together and we're all in the room. And I think that this is just a really fantastic example. Whenever we're pulling this together, the people who we have as expert speakers, as advocates, as researchers and clinicians, we're really just excited to share this and to kind of really think about how really the theme of this is really thinking about advocacy that is collaborative and that we are all better for it in terms of being able to do this in a unified fashion. And again, thank you so much. We're going to keep moving along with our slides. So disclosure for all participants, this is recorded. We will be taking some digital screenshots. If you don't want your name or face or your full name or anything like that, either turn off your camera or change your name or anything like that. Also, please keep yourself on mute. If you have a phone, please have devices ready available because we have some QR codes that you can put your phone onto throughout this time period. So, and then we'll have something about our social media tags as well. Next slide. These are just all of our institutions who are participating in this really group effort. Next slide. And really, we want to, have a large welcome to everybody on behalf of our entire planning committee. We are really thankful for everyone's role that they play in GYN cancer care to begin with, and in particular in helping us design this event. We are happy for you to share on social media if you're able to do two things at once, which I'm not always that great at, but here are our taglines for doing that. We would love to get more exposure and just sharing of anything that you see to take a quick picture of to influence more people. Next slide. We do have a summit resource swag bag that has a lot of different links from all the different organizations and participants and a lot of education. There will be a link to the download in a PDF on this if you use your QR code. We will also put the link in the chat box so that you can link that either now or later and have that as a resource guide for yourself or others to share. Next slide. I'm very happy to introduce our first speaker, who is really going to give us a welcome address. Dr. Cohn couldn't be here in person, but she's going to provide us with a wonderful overview. She is the head of gynecological cancer therapeutics at the National Cancer Institute, in particular in the cancer therapy evaluation program. She's going to speak about her experience in this and how this relates to GYN cancers. And on a personal level, Dr. Cohen is a true patient advocate and has been involved in multiple different organizations to really put the patient voice in her work and in our GYN cancer field. Cheska, go ahead.
Well, hello. My name is Elise Cohn, and many of you know me. I'm a medical oncologist with an expertise in gynecologic cancer. I'm also an ex-laboratory rat, having had my lab at the National Cancer Institute for over 20 years. Currently, I am in charge of the gynecologic cancer portfolio at the NCI Cancer Therapy Evaluation Program. Putting that into English, it means that I participate in, oversee, and watch development and execution of all the trials for patients with gynecologic cancers, whether they're in our National Clinical Trials Network, many of you will think of it as NRG, or the early studies that are done through our experimental therapeutics network. And there I provide the disease support, whereas my counterparts provide the expertise on the new agents we're testing. I think it's fantastic that you're having this Gynecologic Cancer Researcher Survivor Summit, because one of the most important things that we have for advancement is the partnership with our advocates and their families and our patients. We believe moving partnership such as these between the researchers, clinical and laboratory, and the patient community is vital in the progress that we have made and that we'll make in the future. In fact, it's input from you and your ideas about what clinical trials can be developed that our two networks are taking consideration every time we put together a new trial, and it's your participation in our steering committees and task forces that gives us feedback on how to make our trials more user-friendly, more pertinent to the questions that you want answered, and more feasible because you're interested in being a member of those trials. NCI is therefore funding critically important research for gynecologic cancer with your help. I described our early clinical trials program and our National Clinical Trials Network, where NRG is the leader in gynecologic cancer. But I think it's important for you to know that we do many other things as well. For example, for many years now, the NCI has funded a complex specialized program of research excellence that you probably have heard of as the SPORES, which bring together clinicians, translational scientists, epidemiologists, prevention researchers, and laboratory researchers to work on prevention, detection, diagnosis, and treatment of cancers. And there are 6 or 7 spores this year, and I'm very excited to say that there's a new endometrial cancer spore as well. So we're definitely providing that level of support, as well as the individual investigator or small group grants that you've heard of, such as the R01s and the program project grants. We also, through the NCI's Division of Cancer Prevention, have important ongoing work in clinical trials of prevention and cancer care delivery tools, as well as laboratory and developmental work for early detection and prevention across all of the gynecologic cancers and all cancers for women. Importantly, I want to say that with the revitalized Cancer Moonshot, NCI's goals of making a difference in the survival, quality of survival, and quantity of survival of our patients is in line with President Biden's goals to cut the age-adjusted cancer mortality rate by 50% in 25 years. Now, clearly, all of us would rather it be no mortality, but we have to be honest. There's a lot of things that go into causing and treating cancer. But if we can make it a sustainable disease, a disease that we can live with, the way we have with hypertension, the way we have with heart disease, the way we have with diabetes, that will be a huge step forward for all of us who are affected by cancers. Our approach to NCI has always been to partner with our community. And now we have the National Cancer Plan under our newer director, Dr. Bertagnolli, where we're creating a framework that allows us to work together with the community in various ways to reach these important shared goals even faster. And one of those goals is to engage every person and give everybody a chance who has cancer or is at risk of getting cancer to participate in some form of research or clinical trial that's going to help not only them, but also patients in the future. Further, the NCI is dedicated to working with you, the researchers and survivors, and our active patients to eliminate barriers to getting the best possible care. We realize that not all the barriers are financial. They may be distance, they may be child care, they may be elder care, but we understand the importance of giving everybody the best chance to receive the best treatment for one's own cancer. And we're working on modifying eligibility criteria and participation requirements in our clinical trials to make them the most accessible possible for all patients with cancers, especially including those patients who have gynecologic cancers. That allows more patients to participate in clinical trials and increases our potential to learn with you, the patients and survivors, and improve results for everybody currently a patient and for those in the future. Meetings like this important Gynecologic Cancer Researcher Survivor Summit is important to bring you together to talk about challenges, to identify opportunities and remedies to help us improve opportunities for collaboration, opportunities for care, and to improve the quality and quantity of life for everybody who has cancer. I applaud your commitment and contributions. Thank you for your time and efforts, and wish I was there with you. Thank you very much.
A big thank you to Dr. Cohen for her comments. I think they were very energizing and very hopeful comments. As she mentioned in her address, survivor and research partnerships such as this is vital, especially around clinical trials. So we are happy that she was able to send us her comments. So my name is Gina Curry, and I am the Administrative Director for the Office of Community Engagement and Cancer Health Equity at the University of Chicago Comprehensive Cancer Center. And I have been tasked to see who's in the room. We always like to take a temperature of who's with us. And so we're going to launch a poll. And I'm just so grateful to Kimberly's comments earlier that, 4 years, it's been a whirlwind, and it's been such a wonderful ride, such an education for myself to be a part of this. So just thank you to our co-founders for this, and we're going to go ahead and launch the poll. So the first question is, who's in the room and what do you identify as? And I know that, like myself, many of us have multiple hats that we wear. So please go ahead and choose whichever roles you identify with: cancer survivor, caregiver, clinician, patient advocate, research advocate. go ahead and click as many as you identify with. We're at about 25% of the room, so depending on what kind of device you're on, you might have to scroll down because there are, you might not be able to see all of the,
I'm gonna ask a silly question. For some reason, do we click on the, where it just, do you just click on the yes, no answers?
yes.
Okay.
And then the next questions, looks like all of the questions are here. So the next question is, have you attended this conference in the past? You're gonna go, as Dr. Lee alluded to, you're gonna do the yes, no. Have you ever participated in a clinical trial? Options are yes, no. What interested you in registering for this event? Again, you may have to scroll down for all of this. You may not see everything in your screen. We have some options: getting involved in patient advocacy, learning about clinical research, learning more from survivors. Our fifth question is, do you consider yourself a patient advocate? Yes or no? And then our final question is, are you interested in being a patient advocate? Yes or no, or not sure. And we'll have many different ways, a variety of ways for you to reach out to us. You can email us. We'll show our email at the end. In our evaluation, there's going to be a spot for you to fill in. It's going to ask you if you want to, if you're interested in being a patient advocate. And then also we'll have our QR code and all that showing where you can use your phone to send us information, and then we'll contact you and provide a variety of ways to get you started. So we're at 84% of responses. We'll give a little more time to answer the questions before we close out the poll. We're almost there. I guess we'll go ahead and stop it in a few seconds. We may not be able to capture everyone. Okay, we'll go ahead and end it now because it looks like there's no more.
All right.
So can everyone see the results? Okay, so we have 56% cancer survivors. That is wonderful. Welcome, welcome, welcome. And then we have clinicians at 9%, patient advocates at 41%. This is wonderful. Research advocates, 35%, researchers, 21%, and trainees, 9%. Oh, great. So have you ever attended this conference in the past? So we have new faces. Great. 68% said no. So that's wonderful. We have a lot of new faces here today. Have you ever participated in a clinical trial? 82% said no. So maybe after this, that may change. Our next one here. What interested you in registering? We can see the responses here. Getting involved in patient advocacy, wonderful, wonderful. 24% learning about clinical trials, 47%, and learning more from survivors, 29%. Are you a patient advocate? 74% said yes, wonderful. And are you interested in becoming a patient advocate? 74% again. So we're very happy about this. Thank you so much for participating in the poll. Just a way to give us a temperature of what's going on, who's in the room and who's there, what kind of things that you're looking to do, and a way for us to engage with you further after the conference today. So thank you again. So now I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Dr. Dario Roque. He'll be moderating our next session.
Oh, I think,
Mhm.
yeah, go, sorry, my bad.
He'll be
Thank you,
moderating our
Gina.
next session.
Yeah, thank you, Gina. And good morning and welcome, everybody. So glad you all can join us. So we have invited some leaders from some of the major cancer centers here in Chicago just to speak on different components of cancer research as it relates to gynecological cancers. And we understand that research ranges from clinical studies, supportive studies, basic and translational research, as well as clinical trials. So we just wanted to take the next 20 minutes or so to get some input from some of these leaders across the cancer centers. And if you can please go ahead and introduce yourselves and provide just a brief overview of your research focus area to get us started. Maybe we start with Dr. Matei.
Hello, hi Dario, and hello everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. I hope you will find this session informative. I'm Daniela Matei. I'm a medical oncologist, and my area of expertise is gynecologic cancer. I'm a physician scientist. I run a laboratory at Northwestern University focused on ovarian cancer, and the things that preoccupy us most are related to resistance to chemotherapy, mechanisms of resistance, and that we are looking at that from a metabolic angle and from an epigenetic angle. And we hope that our findings that are laboratory-based will lead to potential new treatments for patients with recurrent resistant cancer.
Thank you, Dr. Matei. Dr. Lee, would you like to go next?
Sure, thank you so much. My name is Neetha Lee. I'm a GYN oncologist at the University of Chicago. And I focus in on research and disparities, and I help to lead as the Associate Director for our Cancer Center Community Outreach and Engagement. And a lot of our emphasis is really how do we get more community participation and patient voice into guiding our research, as well as research dissemination and sort of priorities for research. And so I'm really excited to be able to be here to kind of continue to have that focus in on throughout the cancer continuum.
Thank you, Dr. Lee. And Dr. McLaughlin.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you, Dario. I'm Shannon McLaughlin David. I'm the Director of Gynecologic Oncology at the University of Illinois here in Chicago. Excuse me, I am a gynecologic oncologist, and my research efforts are focused on two primary things. One, building a program for clinical and translational research for our patients at the University of Illinois, meaning ensuring that there are the appropriate clinical trial opportunities available for the unique needs of our patient population. And for my own investigator line of work, like Dr. Lee, I also focus on health equities, as that's sort of the mission of the institution at which I work, with a focus on cervical cancer and community engagement. Again, because that is the disease, that and uterine cancer, the diseases we are facing most acutely, I'd say.
Thank you, Dr. McLaughlin. And Dr. Ahmed.
Hi, good morning, everybody, and thank you for inviting me. My name is Amina Ahmed. I'm a GYN oncologist, and I practice at Rush University Medical Center. Most of my time now is spent, I run their cancer program. So I'm their interim cancer center director. I'm their CMO for the cancer center. So Rush is dedicated to looking at various health disparities across various disease sites, not just GYN oncology. So really the majority of my job is to institute and implement different initiatives across disease sites to identify patients highest at risk, to increase our clinical trial enrollments across the various populations that need to be enrolled, and like I said, develop other programs. I have a particular interest in older adult research, and we are establishing a geriatric oncology program currently. So thank you again for having me, and hopefully I can help broaden the knowledge in this area. Thank you.
Thank you so much. So perhaps we can just start with you again, Dr. Ahmed, and we'll go in reverse order. And one of the questions that I think will be helpful for the audience to understand is like, what are you the most excited about in your research, and what direction do you see GYN cancer research going in the next few years?
Thank you. So just for the audience to know, I think most probably do know historically, obviously clinical trials and research in general concentrated on white male population, and so really it's important that we are starting to look at individuals in various populations that are affected by the disease, right? Not just the white population, white male, but obviously we're looking at the underrepresented minorities, older adults. And so the most exciting piece probably at my job and for the next several years is tailoring, number one, breaking the barriers, I would say, of trust, right? We need to actually establish trust for our patient population so we can, number one, get them the cancer treatment that they need, and number two, get them onto clinical trials. I mean, so it has to be one and then followed by the other. What we do currently, which is novel and part of, I think, like President Biden's initiative, is doing a standard SDOH screening across all of our patient population, right? So we screen everybody for areas that could preclude them from getting treatment. So this is not just clinical trials, this is just basic cancer treatment. So everybody gets screened to look to see if they have needs across, food insecurities, housing issues, safety, transportation. So if we can't even meet their basic needs, then we can't even think about having them look at various clinical trials that would obviously be beneficial for them. So to me, it's really exciting that we're addressing these needs and not just looking at cancer treatment, right? Not just looking at clinical trials. Obviously, that's where we need to go. The other piece is, I think we used to concentrate on age, that was a big thing, right? But now it's really more frailty. And so doing frailty assessments across patient populations to really identify patients that would be at risk for treatment, and also then tailoring and opening trials that could address these patients who are much more vulnerable. So to me, in general, the idea that we're identifying patients that have high needs and tailoring our approach to those patients so they're most successful with their treatments, and then obviously then getting them to clinical trials is most exciting. So hopefully I answered your question.
Thank you. That was great. Dr. McLaughlin, do you want to weigh in?
So I take it the question is, what am I most excited about in clinical research? I will emphatically and enthusiastically second everything that Dr. Ahmed just described for sharing that excitement. On the boots on the ground, I think we are seeing more and more clinical trial evidence being translated into practice in a very real way. It used to be several years ago, we just had one treatment for everything. But in the last year or two, we have been able to see the results come to fruition. We'll hear about some of those things later today, and being able to actually implement that and talk with patients about, this is a new opportunity for you. And we participated in this study here at this institution. So your neighbors helped put this new therapy, this innovative approach into your hands and your treatment planning. That's been a really exciting way to engage with patients and kind of take down the barriers of trust, to help understand that they're actually generating these new things and helping make up for underrepresentation in the past.
And Dr. Mateo, if you're able to talk about the same thing, but from the perspective of your work in the lab or the basic science aspect of things, because I feel like sometimes that is the most difficult part to understand for us, those of us that are more in the clinical setting, just knowing, what's coming down the pipeline and what you're working on, what other researchers are working around the country in the lab.
So I think there are many things to be excited about in gynecologic cancer. I'll first talk about my research and then also about some other things that are coming down and they're not yet in clinical practice. I think in my research, my group is about 10 people, of all kind of levels. We have put out a few interesting studies that are very basic, but we hope to see them translate into clinic. We are finalizing a study on a new hypomethylating drug that seems to be very active in ovarian cancer model, even by itself, but also together with carboplatin. And we've identified a mechanism by which this drug works by disrupting the lipid metabolism in ovarian cancer cells. We are working with some physicists in Evanston trying to understand how cancer stem cells, which are cells that are they are the root of cancer, how they regulate the expression of genes, how they become dormant, how they become active. This is like very complex sort of research looking at the chromatin inside the nucleus of the cell. So I'm excited about it, although I also find it very difficult and challenging, but I'm excited because it's the collaboration. We collaborate with people who design new ways to look into the nucleus of cells. And then on our team, there is a mathematician who is able to take that information from looking inside the cells and making it into like a mathematical equation that predicts how genes are expressed. And I'll tell you, we have like 1 hour weekly meetings that are difficult. I come out of there with a headache because we each talk different languages. But I think what's exciting about it is the collaboration and the ability, to intersect these different domains. And I think that's the only way that we can make progress. I sometimes tell my husband about this project, and my husband is not in medicine. He's a social scientist, and he says, this is science fiction. Why did the NCI even give you money for this? This is too early. But I think you have to start somewhere. So it's exciting. I'm also excited in my laboratory about mentorship. I have all these students and postdocs, and some are great and some are not great. But training the new generation, like I will not be doing this forever. I'm planning my retirement in 10 years. So we have to find new people that will replace us. So mentorship and training, it's also an area of excitement. In terms of general, where gynecologic cancer research is going, more from the clinical side, I think, and the University of Chicago probably can speak to this to more extent. There's all this new development in CAR T-cell therapies, and we know immunotherapy doesn't work in ovarian cancer, and trying it to make it work. So many people, so many bright minds around the country and around the world are working on this. It's exciting. Sometimes it's frustrating, because it doesn't work. So we are excited about things that work, but we also have to try to find how to overcome barriers for things that don't work. There are a lot of new drugs coming down the pipe in the DNA repair pathway. That also are there. They should be working, but we're having challenges with them because they are toxic. So understanding how to dose those drugs, how to best use them, it's challenging but exciting. So I think, and we have a partner in pharma. They have more resources than we have, from the NCI, and they are taking an interest. All of a sudden, they are taking an interest in gynecologic cancer. Before, nobody wanted to, develop drugs for endometrial cancer, ovarian cancer. Okay, they're taking an interest also in these rare cancers, low-grade serous cancer. So that we are having new trials that are not run by the NCI, but run by pharma, looking at sub slices of types of cancer. Even in ovarian cancer, there's new trials coming for gene X amplified cancer. This didn't exist before. So I think we've come a long way. It's an exciting time. It is a challenging time. It comes with a bunch of challenges, but we are here to be at the forefront of the battle against cancer. So
thank you so much. That's such a great overview of your work and some of the challenges. But so talking about that, about challenges, and just probably to end the session, because we want to make sure that we stick with the timeline. If Dr. Lee, can you just talk a little bit about some of the other challenges and barriers that exist between, in research and clinical care that you see from your perspective as a clinician, but also as the lead of the Center for Outreach at University of Chicago?
Yeah, I mean, I think some of it is we're so excited about the things that have been developed, both in terms of drugs and in terms of what the scientists are understanding. But we also don't want anything in new technology to widen the gap between who gets this technology and who doesn't get this technology, right? So at the same time that we're excited, we need to make sure that those drugs, or whether it's genetic testing or tumor testing, is available to everybody, right? So that everyone can potentially benefit from these newer realms. I mean, sometimes we think of, as a breast cancer example, we think of when mammograms came about, it decreased in general, it improved survival, right? But it didn't do it equally. And that was actually when the technology for mammograms got developed and implemented. That's actually when we first started to see a black-white disparity between who was actually getting mammograms and who was using this technology. And so that's an older example, but I think the same thing comes true when you're thinking about who gets to participate in clinical trials, who is being, whose tumor is being collected to study to then think about what drugs to develop. So I think I'm excited about the fact that we are all thinking that way, both from the basic scientists, clinical scientists, and the public health sphere of how do we better have everyone participating in those types of discoveries from the get-go. And so I think I would say that I'm really excited, but we have to be sort of aware that if we aren't really deliberate about how we put those things into place, we may mistakenly widen areas of disparities that don't, that don't exist yet, ironically. So I'm very thrilled, and I'm also really thrilled about the amount of GYN cancer advocates that have grown in the last 10 years. That space of not and just knowing, and I see many people who've been doing this type of advocacy work for many, many years on this call, which I'm so excited and have learned so much from. But the fact that we're expanding that group, and that's what our goal is, so that we have more people like Kimberly in every cancer center and in every location or every, place, that's kind of our ultimate goal overall. So I think that's what I would say. It's good, but we got to be careful.
Yep. Well, thank you all so much. This was very brief, and obviously each of you can talk about this for 4 hours, which will be great to do that on another time. But I really appreciate your time in answering all these questions. And I'll go ahead and pass it over to Kimberly Richardson for the next session.
Thank you, Dr. Roque. We just want to go over really quickly what the summit objectives are about. I think I mentioned it very briefly when I started with the welcome, but for me, it's incredibly important for patient advocates to have what I consider a bidirectional relationship with both providers as well as researchers, so that we both get an experience, right? The survivor gets to talk about that PhD, that personal thing of disease. I forget what we call it, the PhD. But it's our lived experience that comes to the table, and it can be harnessed for research down the road. The things that we've experienced as the survivor going through treatment can impact how research designs are done in the future. And then for researchers and the clinician, it's incredibly important for us to start sharing the medicine and the science. Too often with ovarian cancer, it's sort of known that women just hear the information and say, well, let's just do whatever the doctor tells us to do. But we're starting to expand who the ovarian cancer patient is. It's not just women, it's the transgendered community. And we have to find ways to communicate about both the science and the medicine in really important ways. We want to be able to promote and understand research topics. If we as survivors and care partners do not understand the research in easy to understand language, it's going to be very difficult to promote clinical trials and to get that participation that is so desperately needed in all of the gynecological cancers. As well as being able to understand the role of the patient advocate in research. We are evolving, just like Dr. Lee said. We're not just patient advocates that wear our cancer colors and go only to Capitol Hill for legislative advocacy. We're getting involved in the research. And then lastly, that's to support the trainees that are in gynecological cancer so that we can get a more diverse group of researchers, but most importantly, to change the dynamic on how they learn. Because we now have a law in place that expects a diverse action plan, we need to not only train them about the science, but to train them about the patient engagement as well. So that's what we're here to do today. This is what this summit objectives are. Next slide. So without further ado, I am pleased to introduce Dr. Sagar Ghosh, who is going to be our plenary speaker today. Dr. Ghosh currently serves as the Health Science Program Manager for the Congressionally Directed Medical Research Programs through the U.S. Army's Medical Research and Development Command. He has served as the Scientific Review Manager in GTI, which is General Dynamics Information Technology, where he was responsible for planning, coordinating, directing, implementing, and supervising all the tasks that are related to the peer review process of CDM-MRP, as specifically for breast cancer and ovarian cancer. It is my pleasure to welcome Dr. Ghosh. Dr. Ghosh, take it from here.
Thank you, Kim. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Wonderful. Thank you very much. I think your introduction, you have already covered 50% of my talk. So what I'm going to do today, I'm going to tell you that what CDMRP is and what ovarian cancer research program has done so far in past 24 years or 25 years. I see a lot of familiar names here and good to see you guys. I wish we were all together and exchange in person, but that's fine. I'd like to first start this talk with all my gratitude to the patient advocates. They are super. It's not that they are doing there for their own, they are doing for the community, the stakeholders, and CDMRP always work with them. And I'll tell you exactly how. Thanks to Kim and the entire team for this wonderful summit and giving me the opportunity to share about CDMRP. So let's go to the next slide. So CDMRP activities span the full life cycle of management of medical research, basic laboratory research, to advancement of development of clinical trials, and fielding of medical knowledge and the products for health-related issues that are not relevant only to the military, but also the general public. So it was started in 1992 with breast cancer research program. Then there are 34 more programs added to it. And now it's very big. And we fund innovative and impactful research. There is a myth that we only fund in US. That's not true. We actually go global. It's a two-tier process. It has a peer review, which mainly review the scientific part, and also there is a programmatic review. In both phases or stages, we actually incorporate patient advocates. And I see a couple of names here who have already served for ovarian cancer research program. So thank you guys, thanks a lot. We look for breakthrough research and give back to the society. Next slide, please. So this is ovarian cancer research program overview. It started in 1997 with appropriation of 7.5 million. In total, we have received 496.5 million. We received over 4,800 applications so far and funded more than 700 awards. The vision is very simple: to eliminate ovarian cancer, and the mission is to support patient-centric research. So remember, patient-centered research, okay? And also, we like to get the patient advocates in this process. Next slide, please. So this is an important slide just to give you an idea that what is our strategy. Kim has already introduced the concept that it is not only the research, but also promoting the new early care investigators and how they can be integrated into, how they can be trained. So the goals of our program is not only the basic research, develop or validate different preclinical models or health disparity, but also we focus on promoting synergistic team science and enhance and sustain ovarian cancer researchers. I'll give you a little bit more detail about it, how we do it. So basically, there are two different goals. One is research specific, the other one is developing the researcher. They are tied to different areas of emphasis and which are very, very important in ovarian cancer research scenario or the landscape, like basic biology, ecology, therapeutics, screening early stage detection, improving the survivorship, health disparity, and improving precision medicine. These are all tied with the investment strategy that we have. So as you see the two different colors, if you compare the goals versus investment strategy, you can easily align them. The light yellow colors are all research specific, like pilot. I'll give you more information in the next slide. So the light yellow colors are all dedicated to the research, and the orange one is mainly developing the researcher. Okay, so it's a building an academy and building the networking. Next slide, please. So this is a very important slide for the researcher who would like to apply for funding in ovarian cancer research program. This is for FY23. We have already released the program announcement. We already received the application, so it is not for this year. But next year, we will have almost a similar kind of strategy. Again, the first 4 or 5 actually funding mechanisms, they are research oriented. Pilot award, investigator-initiated research award, field expansion, clinical trial, clinical translational award. These are all research specific. And you can see on the right column that how many years and what is the budget. Pilot is a very new, novel, innovative award, 2 years, 300K. IIRA or Investigator Initiated Research Award is more like an NIH R01. It's much bigger. And remember, this 600 or 800K, these are only direct costs. On top of that, there are also indirect costs. So it is more than $1 million. For translational and clinical trial, we have more than 2 million for 4 years. And besides that, we have Ovarian Cancer Academy, or this Clinical Trial Academy. I'll talk more about this. These are person development awards. Okay? Next slide, please. So this particular slide illustrates for last 25 years on the research based on the CSO code or Common Scientific Outline. The largest amount has been spent so far on 2 different areas, biology and treatment. The reason behind until 2022, the appropriation for ovarian cancer research was not that much, 15 to 20 million. So we didn't have scope to go for clinical trials. So we spend more effort or funding on treatment and biology. But now we have also funded on cancer survivorship, prevention, early detection, and also preclinical modeling. Next slide, please. So this slide shows you the different types of mechanisms we have offered so far. We have like concept kind of award, mature award, and also translation award. And the lower side, lower graph, it shows that how we move from bench to bedside and what are the different mechanisms are tied to it, like concept, idea development, pilot. They are more discovery related awards. But we also have clinical development, clinical trials, synergistic translational leverage awards. These are more clinical or bedside. So we have a complete range of different types of awards. So any of you are interested in ovarian cancer research program, apply for ovarian cancer research program. You actually have everything here. Okay. Next slide, please. So this is a snapshot for last 25 years. What are the outcomes of products we have so far? Like we have over 2,000 publications and presentations separately. We have 7 different drugs, although we didn't get enough chance to offer clinical trial, but still we achieved that. The researchers got over 130 patents, 55 therapeutics, and 10 different types of clinical cares. Next slide, please. So I'm not going to go through next 4 slides because there are too many information. What I want to show you that how ovarian cancer research program actually targeted and achieved getting different products or outcomes in prevention. Next slide, please. Early detection, diagnosis, prognosis. Next slide. Treatment, and next slide. Cancer control survivorship. But I would like to highlight a couple of very important outcomes that we have, groundbreaking research that we have got so far, which actually reached to the patient community. Next slide, please. Many of you, I'm sorry, you go to the, yes, thank you. So this, many of you actually know, heard about rucaparib, right, or rucaparib. So this particular research for ovarian cancer, this represents an effective first-line maintenance treatment option for patients with advanced ovarian cancer. Now, OCRP research played a very major role to prove the effect of rucaparib in ovarian cancer. After FDA approved it, now it has reached to the patient community, not to the general public, but also to the military population. We have also achieved to find some genetic testing guidelines in Australia and US, including PALB and BARD1, which are new susceptible genes. There's a new optical imaging, which is already patented, called palaposcope, and this can detect tumors in fallopian tubes. We have also delivered a book called Ovarian Cancer Risk Reducing Surgery, Our Decision Results. Next slide, please. Now, I have so far touched the research part. This is a unique part, a unique thing that ovarian cancer research program has developed, and which is um, it is related to the direct patient outcome. So this is a unique initiative from this program called Academy. Academy was established in 2009 to foster virtual career development and research platform, which can provide intensive mentoring, networking, collaboration, and team science, which experience to give more experience to the early career investigators. This approach is so successful that 5 different CDMRP programs adopted this particular academy. Not only that, even NIH actually developed a new mechanism, or RFA, in 2016 based on this particular academy. This graph shows you that there are 21 alumni and there are 11 scholars, current scholars, and there are 3 more we have funded. So total 14 current scholars right now. And they span different parts of US. Even in Hawaii, we actually have a scholar. So we try to make sure that it is diverse. We reach out different types of population. So next slide, please. This slide highlights and demonstrates the impact of the Ovarian Cancer Academy scholars, what they have given us so far. So there are total 21 who have already graduated. There are 14 current, and we spend 23.5 for already graduated, and right now there are 15 to 16 million that for the current ones. They have succeeded to publish close to 1,000 publications, 400 presentations, 94 grants they received from outside sources, 13 patents, almost close to 100 million funded often. Now, everything is not directly related to the ovarian cancer research program related funded programs, but anything they started from these OCRP funded programs. You can see the ROI. It is a little difficult to find a return of investment, but you can see that what we have invested and what we have found so far. We have been able to pay 3 different aspects, pay attention to 3 different aspects. How Academy helped the ovarian cancer research, number 1. Number 2, how in one hand it actually helped to establish their career, retain them in the ovarian cancer field, which is almost 100%, and encourage them to give back to the society. So this is what we all about. We want to do, we actually ask them to do something which is not for them, but back to the society. Next slide, and final slide. So this is all about what we are thinking for future. I told you that our next step is towards more translational research, towards more bedside. Now with the additional money, thanks to all the patient advocates for going to the Hill and bump the appropriation. So we are now more focusing on translational research. We are trying to increase in the pool of clinical trial researchers, more on therapeutic and non-therapeutic interventions. And we are also now developing a new academy focused on clinical trials. We have already offered the leadership award this year. Next year, we are going to introduce scholars. And we hope in next few years, there will be a lot of products which will be directly benefiting the patient community. Thank you all for listening to us, and thanks for giving me the opportunity to share about us. And great that what you guys are doing. Kudos to all of you. Thank you very much.
Thank you so very much, Sagar. When I first met you, I knew that you were a kind soul, and we'd only spoken via Zoom. And I'm just so grateful that you gave us the time on this Saturday morning to walk us through how this very important research translates into our lives on an everyday level. So I'm pleased always to be a pre-reviewer along with you, and thank you so much for your service.
Thank you very much, Kim. And you know, we are very lucky. From tomorrow, I'm out of job. So this is the last day.
Well, we're glad we got you when we did. Thank you again.
Okay. Have a nice day. Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye now. Next slide. So we're about to go right into our 5-minute break. Please take the 5 minutes to stand, stretch, because we have so much more that's coming that I think that everyone will not only enjoy, but learn so much from. So take this 5 minutes and we will resume back by 10:11. How's that? Sounds good? See you in a few. We're going to start to gather back.
Hi there, welcome back. Hope everybody had a short break. I just want to say
Dr. Lee,
also,
you are on
over
mute.
Zoom, it's always hard to be interactive. I really appreciate everybody who's been putting things into the chat. If there's something that you want to comment on or questions, like, please just put that in there as either a hand raise or say, like, I have something to say. And especially as we go on, I think I'm just kind of getting a sense of who's in the room with us today. And we have some really fantastic, really, experts in advocacy here. And so, part of it is that we want to learn from everyone, and we want to create this as a tool, right? So we kind of work on what we can share today with everybody who's in the room. We plan on kind of thinking about using this recording as a way to share different pieces of it together and have everybody use those pieces for their own events and things like that as well. So please feel free to just sort of like throw in and say, hey, I have a comment to make. I think it's not too unwieldy to do that. And we really want to make sure that this is as interactive as possible. I'm going to introduce our next moderator for our next session. The Summit Swag Bag is here. But before that, I wanted to just have a shout out to the Giving Voices Collective Awareness and Advocacy. Next slide. So Ms. Monica Bertrand is an individual who has been personally affected by ovarian cancer in her family and life, and has given rise to creating something called the Giving Voices Collective, which hosts fundraising concerts for a variety of women's health issues through the year. And most recently, she hosted a concert in honor of ovarian cancer research. One of our volunteers and cancer survivors, Alicia Cook, helped to kind of really provide remarks about cancer health equity and survivorship, and a little bit about what our research teams do at University of Chicago. Next slide. I just wanted to say a shout out to her team, Monica's team, in terms of raising money for ovarian cancer research. And I think this was just such a good reminder that kind of parallels what Dr. Ghosh spoke about, right? So we sometimes see these like really big numbers out there in terms of like millions of dollars, but those millions of dollars don't start from nowhere, right? We all really have a part to play in terms of what we do at our personal level, at our local level, through our advocacy for programs such as the Department of Defense that Dr. Ghosh was talking about, also through a lot of the advocacy organizations that raise money and have now become really key in terms of funding researchers, right? And this is obviously well beyond ovarian cancer, and we're going to hear about efforts in all of the GYN cancers that really are so critically important in terms of like how we think about this. And so I think this is just an emphasis on like, it's really, again, like it's all of us, boots on the ground. And so we just wanted to really recognize Monica as an example of this today. So next slide. So I just wanted to introduce briefly Dr. Kayla Nixon Marshall, who is a minimally invasive gynecological surgeon at Rush University, and is really dedicated to focusing on racial disparities in gynecology. And as a result, has really been so important to kind of think about us as GYN oncology patients or researchers as like, hey, this doesn't start in a vacuum, right? Like we really need to think about the prevention, the education, the awareness about symptoms. And so I'm really thrilled that Dr. Nixon Marshall is here to moderate our session on survivors as research advocates. And so I'm going to let her take it from here. And I know our incredible advocates will be introducing themselves as well. And again, more stuff in the chat as you think things through.
Thank you so much, Dr. Lee, and truly it is a pleasure and an honor to be able to join you all today. This is my first time attending this summit, and I'm really, it's been thrilling.
Sorry.
Am I on mute?
Yep.
Okay, good. It's been thrilling so far, but I'm even more excited to kind of hear from the patient perspective. And so a huge privilege to get to moderate this panel with our survivors that have become patient advocates. So I wanted to start just by giving each of our advocates an opportunity to introduce themselves, sort of share their backstory, and then sort of what led to their involvement in with each organization that they are connected to. So why don't we start with Ms. Powell?
Good morning. Thank you so much for having me. I am Sasha Powell from the Powell Drescher Ovarian Cancer Research Foundation. My involvement in ovarian cancer research started about 13 years ago, which was ironically about 6 years before my own diagnosis. I heard about a local organization that had a fun run to raise funds. And I thought, well, I run and it's a good cause, I'll do it. And I had a lot of fun doing it. So I kept doing it for 6 years, but I had no connection to the organization. I didn't know anybody with ovarian cancer. I didn't have any cancer in my family. And that all really changed for me in January of 2017 when I went in for a routine gynecological exam and I came out with an ovarian cancer diagnosis. When I finished my chemotherapy, I decided that I wanted to be more involved than just raising funds for this disease. And around that same time, two things happened to me. And the first one was that I was speaking with a scientist friend of mine, and she told me that most scientists will never meet the patient that they're trying to help. And to be perfectly honest, I was stunned because I couldn't imagine working for an entire career trying to help a category of people and never meeting one of them, never having it be real to the scientist, never hearing thank you. And so I decided right then that I wanted to get involved in research, even if it was only to say thank you, even if it was only to cheerlead on those days when things aren't going maybe as you hoped. And I could say, hey, you're doing great, let's keep going. The second thing that happened to me at that same time was I attended a scientific conference and I was listening to a panel of advocates and scientists speaking. And they were talking about things that I knew quite well. Ovarian cancer is a relatively rare diagnosis compared to some other cancer types, and it has a high mortality rate. And many of the people who are still here will be too sick to do anything beyond trying to stay alive. And I knew all of that. But what hit me in that conference was that that left a relatively small pool of people who were survivors who could advocate, and that I was part of that pool. And I decided right then and there that I had a moral obligation to promote ovarian cancer research, to participate in it, and to speak up for all the people who no longer could. Since then, I've become involved in research, first as a consumer reviewer with the Ovarian Cancer Research Program. I've supported the Ovarian Cancer Academy. I'm a member of a consortium of scientists who are studying the origins of ovarian cancer. I've reviewed lay abstracts, submitted letters of support, participated in mock review panels, and most recently had the great privilege of teaching as part of a program at the Medical College of Wisconsin, where we are teaching prospective scientists about the importance of the use of advocates in research and how to work with us. I was quite happy doing all of that. And then in 2020, I had my first recurrence. And at that point, the urgency for me to do what I can now became incredibly powerful. I had all along, of course, been raising funds for ovarian cancer research and doing it in collaboration with my oncologist, who's a clinician researcher. But then I decided to really get more serious about it. And last year, he and I founded the Powell Drescher Ovarian Cancer Research Foundation. And our mission is not only, of course, to raise funds for ovarian cancer research, but to really champion the collaboration between the scientist and the survivor, to make the path to research advocacy easier for survivors and encourage more people to be involved, but also to encourage the scientists to use us in research. And I'm thrilled that in our very relatively short lifespan, it's been about 17 months, we've sent 4 advocates to conferences. We are about to fund our first research grant, and we have some other programs in the pipeline that I may touch on later. So thank you so much for having me.
Amazing story. Thank you so much for sharing. And yes, you guys have done a lot in a very short time. And I think that speaks to a lot of what you commented on, just the motivation and how your experience can really, be light the fire under that. And so thank you for that. And yeah, I also appreciate just the point about us all coming together truly, with ovarian cancer survivorship, maybe being a little bit, having more rare advocates, working together with other types of gynecologic cancers, and us all, seeking the same goal is really important. So thank you for speaking to that. Let's go on to Miss Adrienne Moore. Would you tell us a little bit about your backstory and your organization?
Sure. Good morning, everyone, and thank you for having me. Again, my name is Adrienne, and I am not an advocate on purpose. I know that it's not a nouveau or niche thing to say, but I would have rather not have had my experience that I have had with this particular gynecological cancer. I tell you, in 2003, I was diagnosed with my first GYN cancer, or an ovarian cancer that was caught at an early stage. And when I had a hysterectomy and they took out both of my ovaries, I didn't think anything else that would be at risk for any other GYN cancer. So when I started to have complaining about my periods being irregular, or moving from being light to heavy within hours, and given my history, and my providers had told me that this was normal, because I probably was experiencing fibroids or ovarian cysts, and because of my previous history or my past treatment of chemotherapy, I was most likely entering into menopause early. So I was happy in my ignorance, and this went on for years. It was in 2015 that I lost my health insurance, and I am a respiratory therapist by trade. I was out every day taking care of people, advocating for women or people with respiratory illnesses, but I couldn't afford to take care of myself because I lost my health insurance. So I still, again, rested on, well, my providers in the past have told me that the issues that I'm seeing with my period would be normal for me because of A, B, C, or D. And all of that was wrong. In 2016, March of 2016, I went to I had my first biopsy. The first time anyone ever talked to me about having a biopsy because of what I was experiencing with my period. And I asked what it was, and she said it was because of something called endometrial cancer. Why I had never heard of that, if I was at risk for it, if I was displaying symptoms of it, no one had ever talked to me about that before, was beyond me. But that's the past, because now I have this stage 3 diagnosis, and what am I going to do with it? Well, in 2018, I was approached by Dr. Kimmy Dole that broached that question to me. What are you going to do about it? Black women are twice as likely to die from this particular cancer because of exactly what all the experiences that you had, that being told that you had a fibroid or cyst, or that your abnormal bleeding for you was normal. And we have to stop normalizing this messaging if we want to start changing the disparities in the outcomes for Black women with this cancer. Would you join me in working with the Endometrial Cancer Action Network for African Americans and help bring that messaging to more Black women like yourself, so we can start saving lives instead of actually mourning them? So, and I told her yes. I said yes, and I thanked her very much for the opportunity. And that was in 2017. It's now 2023, and I preside over the organization. And we work to really, truly just increase our visible community of Black survivorship, so that Black women first know that they're not alone when they're diagnosed with this cancer, but also know that they're at risk for this cancer, and what's the cost of them not knowing about it. And the cost is our lives. So it's better to educate. It's better to promote awareness than to come and be reactionary and say, I got this cancer. Why didn't I know anything about it? And that's why we're here.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, truly. I am such a fan of Dr. Kimmy Dole, just a lot of work that she does within the disparities field. And I know she's a Northwestern alum. So that's a nice little point of connection too. But thank you so much for being so involved with that community. And I do just really strongly endorse everything you're saying about how sometimes early symptoms of different gynecologic cancers and endometrial cancer can be, attributed to other things, which is exactly why partnership with our, benign and complex gynecology colleagues like myself, so we can be, included in this way to help prevent and detect really early some of those symptoms is so important. So thank you so much for speaking to that. And then let's go ahead and let Ms. Kimberly Williams, would you introduce yourself, tell us your story about your and your involvement with your organization as well?
Absolutely. And it is an honor to just be here with these dynamic panelists. So I will say that. So thank you so much for allowing me to be here. Again, my name is Kimberly Williams, and I am with a group named Survivor, so spelled CERVIVOR. We are a group of cervical cancer advocates. And every person that is a part of Survivor has actually had a diagnosis of cervical cancer. So my cervical cancer story begins in basically November of 2017. So in November 2017, I was having bleeding that wasn't synced up with my cycle. And one of my best friends said, "Hey, Kim, go to the doctor and see about it." Didn't want to go, but I went anyway. My pap was abnormal. My doctor said, "Don't worry about it. Come back in 3 months. This happens. It will probably correct itself." I went back in February of 2018, and he looked me in my face and said, "Kiddo, you have cancer." I was 42 years old. I know I look beautiful. But at 42 years old, I a mother of two, a wife at the time. I had cancer, and I was like, "Oh my God, how am I going to go through this?" And I was scared, of course. It was called early detection saves lives. My cancer was 1B2, and I had a radical hysterectomy. I was told that my radical hysterectomy was successful, and I came back. And when I came back for my follow-up, I was told that there were cancerous cells on the outside of my cervix that they found, and they wanted to do some maintenance chemo and radiation. My insurance would not pay for an additional scan for me to see where those cells may be. So it took a year. So April 2019, I was able to get one scan, and that scan showed that the cancer had actually moved to the other side of my body. And now I'm stage 3, and I need aggressive radiation and chemotherapy. So in August of 2019, when I dropped my kids off at school, newly divorced, I walk in to get my first chemo and my first radiation treatment. And the emotions and feeling alone, because when I was originally diagnosed, I thought I was the only person in the world that had cervical cancer. I know Miss Adrian said I had never heard of this cancer, and I really never heard of it. And I was walking around, what are my cancer colors? I don't even know. And so that's what made being a part of Survivor so important to me, is because I'd never heard of the cancer, and having other people that just understood me. I didn't have to explain why I felt the way I felt or the stigma that is surrounded cervical cancer, because everyone knew. In October of 2019, I rang the bell twice, I sure did, for radiation and for chemo, signifying that I was completed with my treatment. In December of 2019, I received my first no evidence of disease but I had an emptiness inside of me. And I think most cancer survivors feel that way. You've completed your course, now what? Because everything that you were doing at that point was all about completing that course. One of the reasons why I is so involved with Survivor is because I know that this is a cancer that can be eliminated, and it all comes from early detection. And we know that early detection saves lives. So that's my story.
Yes, thank you so much. And yeah, something you spoke to, and I think Ms. Moore spoke to this a bit too, but just how we need to work to make sure that our policies, insurance policies, are covering these sort of interventions for early diagnosis and detection, because it's truly unacceptable when we have delay in treatment because of things like insurance not covering scans and whatnot. And so I encourage everyone to join the breakout sessions where we're going to be talking about some potential policy interventions, and any ideas that you have. And I know we're running short on time. I wondered if I just had just one question, that if any of our panelists have just one key point of advice for any other survivors who might be considering patient advocacy, maybe nervous around how to get involved. Is there any just one pearl that you would share with them? And then I think we'll have to end after that.
I'll go ahead. I think the one pearl that I would tell people is to talk to people, talk to survivors, talk to patients, talk to your physician, talk to survivors of other cancer types. There's so much information out there, and you don't need to reinvent the wheel. On the other hand, it's also a great way to find out where the gaps are and what you can help fill in. So I would say, don't be afraid. Don't think that you don't have anything to provide, because you absolutely do.
Exactly. That's wonderful. Any other key pearls of wisdom? If not, it's 100% okay.
Yeah. Okay, go ahead.
No.
All right, I'm just going to say that for anyone, you to know that you don't have to be a part of a large organization or this huge body in order to make a difference. You can decide for yourself as an individual that you want to advocate for the specific disease state in which is affecting you. And you can start by simply, having a conversation with your mother or your sister. Hey, what does your period look like? Because I know mine looked like this. And it turned out that I had this particular cancer. And I would want you to go through the same thing. Because generally speaking, we don't just walk around talking about our periods as women. We say, oh my gosh, I'm cramping. It's that time of month. We give it all this other different flowery language. But in the real sense of the matter, this is urgent. We have to be clear. I need you to be clear that, one, if you are in menopause and if you see a spot of blood, that means go to your provider. If he doesn't give you the answers you need, get a second opinion. And then there's two, do you even know what menopause is or what a regular menstrual cycle should look like? Have those conversations with your younger counterparts, with your older women, especially, who might not even be going for their well women visits anymore. Again, you don't have to be a part of this big body in order to make an impact or to make a difference. Advocacy begins with you just because you care and you have the experience that you can share.
Yes, amazing, amazing point.
And I was just gonna say really quickly, because they have taken all my nuggets. They just took them away because they're so awesome. But I was gonna say that it's okay to not know everything. I think sometimes with having cancer patients, we just want someone that is able to be there with us. And even if you're a person that just goes with them to the doctor, but normalize having conversations. I grew up as a person, I had older parents, and I think minorities or diverse populations, it's normal to say whatever goes on in the house stays in the house. And so there are several people that now, just even today, don't even know I'm divorced. If they watch this, they're like, what? But but I talk about cervical cancer all the time. One of the reasons why is because getting the word out, but it's okay not to know everything and to tell people, go back to your doctor. So you don't have to know all the fancy medical terms. Just give them the encouragement that you would want someone to give you, and just continue to normalize conversations surrounding GYN cancers.
Yeah, agreed. I couldn't have said any of that better myself. So truly in light of that, just having the conversations and being transparent with your stories, I just want to thank each of you so much for sharing your stories with us, and give you all a round of applause. So thank you.
Thank you so much. I also applaud the three of you, then the four of you, the moderator as well. Thank you so much for a very informative, inspiring, and to be quite frank, a little infuriating conversation. Thank you so much. I salute all three of you. So we're going to move on to our next panel, and I'm excited to introduce the panel around ways to get involved in patient advocacy. And we have two powerhouse speakers with us today, Ms. Shelley Funeso and Dr. Nikayla Cook. And I'm going to turn it over to Shelley first to start us off.
Great. Thank you so much for having me. It's really an honor to be here today. I am the CEO of the National Coalition for Cancer Survivorship, a patient advocacy group based in the Washington, D.C. area. And we represent all cancer survivors living with and through a cancer diagnosis. Next slide. So when our founders came together to start NCCS back in 1986, they really coined the common definition of survivor, which is from time of diagnosis. At that time, people were still considered victims. So we think of someone as a survivor from diagnosis. We honor everybody choosing the word that they feel best describes them. But when we talk about who we advocate for, it's everyone touched by cancer, including family members and friends and caregivers. Next slide. So our mission is to advocate for quality cancer care, and we do that by empowering cancer survivors to advocate for themselves. But also, and what I'll be talking more about today, is training and supporting cancer survivors to be advocates for better care in their communities. We also provide data and resources for healthcare professionals on how to deliver quality cancer survivorship care, cancer care during treatment, and then also the post-treatment survivorship care. And then we advocate at the national level for public policies that address the needs of cancer survivors. Next slide. So one of the things I want to talk to you about is our cancer policy and advocacy team, and it's our program to engage advocates. And we do that through a number of different things. We have we have about 1,000 advocates in our network, and we try to match them with opportunities. So we heard earlier about the DoD congressionally directed research program. That requires an organization to nominate a survivor to become a reviewer, and we work with the DoD teams as they recruit survivor advocates to sit on those review panels, and we've nominated quite a number of advocates across different types of cancers to serve on those panels. We also, we try to be just a connector. We have media will come to us and say, I'm doing a story on this, and I'm looking for someone who's experienced this type of thing. And we can kind of try to find somebody in our network who meets that. Or sometimes it's pharmaceutical companies that are putting together an advisory panel of patients who've had a certain type of diagnosis or had a certain type of treatment, and we can try to make those connections. And so we just try to facilitate that. We especially research advocacy, we don't do that ourselves, but we try to facilitate by making those connections. But the other thing we really do is a lot of that public policy advocacy. So we bring advocates to Washington, D.C. in June for a 2-day symposium and a Hill Day. And we have training on how to meet with your members of Congress. And we offer scholarships to attend that training, or the Hill Day and Symposium. And then we also have a newsletter that we send out once a month. We have an online forum. We do webinars several times a year on different topics that are of importance to cancer advocates. Next slide. And then a program that's very near and dear to my heart is Elevating Survivorship. Next slide. Miss Kimberly Richardson was in our first class of Elevate Ambassadors back in 2019, and she came to the program. So what we do is we recruit advocates. We have a selection process. You have to apply for it. It's in the spring, and we select a group of roughly 10 to 12 advocates who are working on projects in their communities to improve survivorship. And that can be it's a very broad definition of community. It can be an online community, it can be a physical community. Some of our Elevate ambassadors work with the Cancer Center on a specific program. So one of our ambassadors this year is working on sexual health training for the survivors for their cancer center, because we know that that's a huge need, that there are a lot of sexual side effects of treatment and not a lot of help for survivors to deal with those. So this is just some of the examples of some of the projects last year's cohort of ambassadors did. Kimberly Richardson came to us with an idea for a project that she wanted to do. And then through the course of the training, and we had a 2-day training in Washington, D.C., and in meeting the other advocates, she's just so incredibly visionary and motivated and passionate, and she just came up with more ideas and ended up doing like 4 projects instead of 1. And she was already an incredible advocate when she came to us, but I like to think we helped her sort of, push her even further in her advocacy and to provide support for her. And also, what we really do try to be a connector. And that's one of the things I think a hallmark of what we do at the Elevate Ambassador program. Next slide. And then I know that we have researchers on this summit as well. We have a program called Survivorship Champions, which is really for clinicians and researchers who are trying to improve survivorship care. And we, again, share resources. We do webinars. We have a Survivorship 101 presentation we can deliver. We've also done a number of grand rounds presentations for different types of programs, whether it be medical oncology, radiation oncology. We've done it for a lot of different residency and fellowship programs, where we can bring data from our surveys that we do and patient perspectives and clinician perspectives to talk about survivorship needs. Next slide. And then we do our State of Cancer Survivorship survey every year. The survey, we have a webinar next week to release the results of the survey. I hope that you can join us. The QR code will let you register, or you can see the link there, and it's also in the virtual swag bag. But this is our 5th year to do the survey, and we talk to survivors about their experience from diagnosis through treatment and post-treatment care, trying to identify what are some of the challenges they face, what is their satisfaction with the care they receive, where are the gaps in care, and then where are there differences in different populations and how they experience the cancer system. So we know that cancer is much more difficult for people who have lower incomes, who don't have as good of insurance. Young adults are very hard hit by cancer and the challenges that it faces them in their career. I'm sorry. My dogs are weighing in on that. So this year, the one thing that we added to the survey this year was we surveyed about 500 caregivers on their experience, and we're really excited to share those results. So I hope you can join us next week. Next slide. And then finally, I wanted to mention the Comprehensive Cancer Survivorship Act is a bill that we have been working on that was introduced by Congresswoman Debbie Wasserman Schultz, Brian Fitzpatrick, Mark DeSaulnier, and then in the Senate, Senators Amy Klobuchar and Ben Cardin. And this was introduced in June. There's information about it on our website, and we are trying to get more members of Congress to sign on as co-sponsors for this bill. And I think I have one more slide on this. Yes, so this just gives a little bit of information about what the bill does, but you can go to our website for a lot more information about it. One of the things that would provide coverage for cancer care planning services to address both the cancer care planning at diagnosis, but also if there's any change in the course of treatment, during treatment, and then at that transition to survivorship, really to try to help empower the patient to be better involved in their post-treatment care, and then also to help their primary care physician to be engaged in their helping with that survivorship care. It also has provisions around navigation services for survivorship, employment assistance to try to help survivors and caregivers and their families to stay employed during their treatment. It has some provisions for fertility preservation, some education and awareness about survivors, and then also some provisions to help with reimbursement to better incentivize the delivery of survivorship care, because that's a huge challenge right now. I think that was my last slide. Oh, and this is how you can connect with us. You can sign up on our website for our healthcare roundup, which is our newsletter that has policy news and updates. And then we also have a cancer survivorship checklist. These are also in the digital swag bag, but the checklist is a way to, there's versions of the checklist for newly diagnosed, for people who are transitioning to post-treatment care, and for people living with advanced cancer. And you can customize it based on the type of cancer that you have. And we're working to build additional types of versions of the checklist. Well, next year, we're going to be launching a head and neck cancer survivor checklist, and we continue to expand the checklist, and it's a great resource for people who are going through treatment or going through that transition to post-treatment care. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. I believe that we are holding questions until the end. Very great to hear about the addition of the caregivers questioning in the survey, as well as the policy work. I believe we're going to hold questions until the end, so I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Nikayla Cook.
Well, thank you so much. It's wonderful to be here and have the opportunity to participate in the panel today. And it's a pleasure to meet all of you and hear some inspiring stories and learn from you, really. I just wanted to also take this moment to share my gratitude and awe for Kimberly Richardson, who is a member of our Board of Governors and a prior PCORI ambassador. I want to thank her for her leadership as a patient advocate and the invitation to speak with you today on ways to get involved with patient-centered research. We can go to the next slide. I thought I'd start just by a little bit of background about myself. As you just heard, I'm Nikayla Cook, and I'm the Executive Director of the Patient-Centered Outcomes Research Institute in Washington, D.C. I'm a cardiologist and a health services researcher by background, but I'm also a daughter, a family member, and have been a caregiver, and I'm really pleased to be part of the discussions today. You can also see that previously I was at the National Heart, Lung, and Blood Institute of the National Institutes of Health, where I served as a senior scientific officer and chief of staff. You can go to the next slide. Just a little bit about the mission of PCORI. Those of you that are familiar with PCORI may know that we're a nonprofit research institute, and we're the nation's leading funder of what's called comparative clinical effectiveness research, which is research that's really designed to compare both the benefits and harms of at least two different methods to either prevent, diagnose, treat, or monitor a clinical condition or improve care delivery. And our mission, though, is really about generating the type of evidence that's going to help people make better informed decisions about their health and healthcare. And we do that with a very unique approach, which really entails meaningful engagement of patients and families and caregivers and the broader health and healthcare community throughout the research process. And I'll tell you a little bit more about that in a moment. But I thought you may want to know that cancer is a really significant part of our research portfolio and the second biggest category of our research funding. We funded over 100 studies for nearly a total of $500 million across prevention, treatment, and survivorship. And cancer survivors and advocates, as you've heard today, really can make a big difference in research. And I thought I'd just give you an example from our portfolio. As many of you may be familiar with, and we've heard today, that many cancer survivors and their family caregivers respond to their experiences by engaging in activities to really improve the care of people diagnosed with cancer, often even in the future, even when it's not concerning themselves. And aging really, as you know, is one of the bigger risk factors for developing cancer. And approximately 60% of cancers occur in persons 65 years or older. And so a PCORI-funded study that was actually done in New York aimed to improve communication about age-related concerns between oncologists, older adults with advanced cancer, and their caregivers that could affect chemotherapy outcomes. And the principal investigator of this study, who was at the University of Rochester, commented that this study taught him about the benefits of conducting research in partnerships with patients, caregivers, and advocates. And he commented that he would never again undertake a conceptualization or implement a research project without the input of these important stakeholders in their work. And one of the cancer survivors who spoke about the project and her role in it commented that she helped design, she chaired the 13-person stakeholder advisory board. And in that role, she reported that she worked with amazing cancer patients, caregivers, and advocates, which was internally helpful to her. And they created things like acronyms and logos and brochures, streamlined consent forms, suggested changes in the study protocol, edited questionnaires, and wrote a guide for and a role-played effort for recruiting diverse patients into the studies. And they felt like they really made a big difference. So that's just a little bit of a snapshot of the type of work that advocates and others really engage with PCORI-funded research to make a difference. Let's go to the next slide. I just want to tell you a little bit more about PCORI, and just to note up front that at PCORI, we don't actually engage in patient advocacy ourselves, whether it's public policy or clinical policy. Our mandate really and our requirement is to fund the development of the evidence to inform decision-making. And we provide many avenues, though, by which patients and families and communities like yourselves could be involved in patient-centered research. Let's go to the next slide. So at PCORI, engagement of patients and caregivers and really all of those across the healthcare community is at the heart of what we do, and we call that research done differently. We define engagement as the art and science of bringing people together who represent the variety of perspectives that are really needed to make research truly useful to patients, to caregivers, clinicians, and the healthcare community. And the model that you see here on the screen captures this foundational involvement of patients and other stakeholders from all aspects of healthcare. They participate actively and in meaningful ways in the entire research process, including even identifying the areas of focus for research funding, planning the study and designing the research question, reviewing applications for funding, being part of the conduct of the study and participating in the research itself, and also participating in the peer review process of the research results that come through on the other end, and participating in the dissemination and the implementation of the study results. We really believe that if we include the voices and lived experience of patients and others, that we actually help to ensure that we're studying the issues that are important to them and the outcomes that matter to them and ultimately can benefit from them. And you can see at the bottom of this slide really 6 different principles that we've learned through our experience of engagement in clinical comparative effectiveness research. And those are principles like reciprocal relationships, co-learning, partnership, trust, transparency, and honesty that are critical and key to making engagement meaningful in the research continuum. Let's go to the next slide. I know many of you are interested in how to engage with PCORI directly, and so I wanted to speak to that a little bit. And what I'll focus on is how to engage with PCORI rather than with the awardees or specific research projects, because there are just so many ways to get involved. We can go to the next slide. So one of the ways I wanted to tell you about is our ambassador program, and it's designed to help develop a community of trained and well-informed patients and partners to meaningfully collaborate with researchers and with each other in a very patient-centered and community-driven way focused on comparative clinical effectiveness research projects, and also to help expedite the dissemination and implementation of research findings through networks and local communities. Anyone really can apply to be part of this program, so I hope that you have some interest in thinking about this. And if you're interested, go to our website at pcori.org and search for the term ambassador. You can also find this link in the swag bag, the virtual swag bag that's going to be circulated. I also just wanted to highlight that we also have, amongst our multiple types of awards, a special funding opportunity called Engagement Awards. And Engagement Awards are really focused on helping to build capacity for patients and families and communities to partner with researchers in CER And it's also a mechanism by which we can develop pathways and vehicles to disseminate PCORI-funded evidence that may be of interest to a variety of communities in languages and formats that really make sense to your community. And we recognize that it's just not good enough for research to be published, and that we need to support communities in disseminating and implementing the results that can make a positive difference in their decision-making about health and healthcare. And that's a critical part of PCORI's work. We've had several community-focused organizations from the Chicago area receive engagement awards, including Alliance Chicago and the Total Resource Community Development Organization. So we're really looking forward to hearing more from our Chicago partners and thinking about these opportunities. But you may also be interested in getting involved with PCORI as even a merit reviewer to review the applications that come in for funding, or as a peer reviewer where the research results are reviewed and then posted on our website. Our merit review panels review those applications, and they include scientists, patients, caregivers, clinicians, policymakers, payers even, purchasers, and researchers. So we really get the perspectives of the broader healthcare community. And the peer review panels, as I mentioned, review the final research results of PCORI-funded studies and make sure that they meet the highest standards of rigor, of scientific rigor, methodological rigor, as well as relevance to patients in the broader health and healthcare community. And then finally, you can see on this slide, we also have advisory panels, which are really more formally constituted groups of people from a variety of backgrounds. And they include patients, and they meet regularly to advise PCORI on a range of topics and really provide useful feedback on developing our funding initiatives. And in fact, our co-chair of the PCORI Patient Engagement and Advisory Panel is from Chicago, based out of Northwestern. So these are wonderful opportunities to participate with PCORI. And as I mentioned, while we don't engage in direct advocacy to change public policy or clinical policy or even coverage or payment policy, we do think that engaging with patients, communities, and other partners are really foundational to everything that we do. So we support many different avenues for interested people to get involved with PCORI, participate in our processes, and advocate with us on the evidence needs of their community. And as I mentioned, listening to and integrating patients and families and communities and really having their participation in our full research process is really part of our DNA at PCORI. So I hope this is a brief introduction that's been helpful to you, and I want to wish you all the best of luck in your continuing efforts to grow this community of researchers and patient advocates. And I hope you'll consider many of the ways of getting involved with PCORI, because making these kinds of connections is so important for our learning from each other, and building these types of relationships can really help advance research and advocacy in the long run. And we have so much to learn from our patient advocates in this virtual room. I think just my last slide is a great appreciation to be here and to look forward to your questions.
Thank you so much to both of our presenters. And as Dr. Cook mentioned, the floor is open for questions. I just want to draw attention. There's some chat going on, so I want to just draw attention to how we can get more involved and engaged to support the CCSA. And so there is a link that was put in the chat, and it says on our website, we have more information about the CCSA, including fact sheets and suggestions to talk to your members of Congress to ask them to support the bill. So if you have any more questions directed about this or anything else that was just discussed, please put in the chat or come off mute. But one of the things that I wanted to ask to Ms. Fulton-Nessa is describe the power of getting involved in legislative advocacy, just so people to hear from your vast experience.
Well, I always say that my favorite part of my job, and I love my job, but my favorite thing is taking people to Capitol Hill to meet with their members of Congress who've never been before, because you see kind of the light bulb go off when people go in and they're maybe a little bit nervous about it, but you see the light bulb go off when they realize that their story combined with the data and the analysis can really make a difference. So it's, lobbyists can go in and talk about data all the time or make policy arguments. But when you combine that with the personal story of how they've been affected, it really makes a difference. And cancer touches almost everyone, whether they have a diagnosis themselves or a family member does. And so it's not a partisan issue, although, things in DC are kind of crazy right now and everything's very partisan, but everybody's touched by cancer. And so it's just, we can't do it alone talking about patient advocates. We have to bring those patients to the legislators and let them hear their personal story and then tie it to what we're asking for. And one of the things is, as an advocate, you have to be able to tell your story in a different variety of settings. Sometimes you get to give a keynote speech where you get to tell the long version of your story. Sometimes you have 5 minutes. But when you're in these offices, you've got to have a 2-minute version of it. And that's pretty hard to do because you've been through so much. But that's one of the things that we try to help people with, to prepare them to go into these meetings, because the whole meeting may be 15 minutes. So we have a worksheet that actually helps you take your story and boil it down to the most essential pieces and then use it to support the legislation. So it's I love it. I'm a policy nerd, but I love being able to help empower people to share their story and see the difference that it can make when they talk to their legislators, because their job is to listen to you. They don't have to agree with you. They don't have to do everything you say, but they do have to listen.
Thank you so much. And I totally agree about, sometimes you have to have that elevator speech. You might only have 30 seconds. So how can you craft that into your long message into a 30-second, PSA, if you will. Right. And I couldn't also agree with you more about Kimberly being a visionary, and she's helped a lot of our patient advocates to craft those shorter messages. So thank you so much for that. Dr. Cook, thank you again for your presentation. And you were talking about, I was just chatting back and forth with Dr. Lee because we had a fellow who did some similar work, and I'm like, was that PCORI? But it wasn't. It was not. But it's such a timely kind of research and the impact of working around cancers for the aging population, because one thing about research and clinical trials and policy and advocacy is that survivorship is longer now. And so we do have a lot more senior people, and also diagnosis as well, but for older ages, but it's very important. So one of the things I wanted to talk about and just ask you was, have you had any requests, and this isn't about aging, I just was commenting on that, but have you had any requests for comparative research around gynecologic cancer specifically for the PCORI?
It's really a great question. And, we have at PCORI a range of conditions that we actually see applications on, and we welcome the range of conditions. And we do have areas that we focus on based upon what we hear from stakeholders, advocates, patients, et cetera, as what they feel is really important for us. And so that's the kind of reason why we like to participate in these types of summits and activities, to hear really what's on the minds of the patients and advocates, et cetera, in terms of the types of questions that may be relevant. And so our portfolio is pretty broad. And I mentioned the larger portfolio of cancer-funded work. And some of it, I'm mentioning the breadth of it because some of it may be applicable in terms of multiple cancers, because it's really about things like common threads related to survivorship, things like mindfulness and things of meditation or other types of things that can be helpful for stress or other consequences and symptoms that come in the survivorship realm. So it's really important to recognize that while it may be not specific to gynecologic cancers, at times it's really applicable, even in the way in which some of this research is done. And we also have on our website something called a portfolio tool that allows you to go in and see exactly the studies that have been funded in each condition in every area. And so we can certainly do that and provide that in the grab bag if people are interested in that, to really understand that breakdown of the types of cancers and gynecologic cancers that may have been studied in our portfolio.
I'll just shout out Dr. Cook with that question because I think that that's fantastic. And I will say that we've been participating in some of those things. And so we're so excited to have that in that portfolio that you mentioned. So one of them is the Sisters Study, which is funded by Dr. Dole at University of Washington. And we are at University of Chicago, one of the sites. I believe there may be more coming up in Chicago as well, for providing a randomized trial to look at social support for African-American patients with a diagnosis of endometrial cancer. So that's like really this interesting like national to local thing, which we were so excited about. And then with one of our local federally qualified health centers, they were actually funded in some of their women's GYN, not just women's GYN, but like women's research at the FQHC level. So that was fascinating to me because we were working with them on their projects and helping them with the project on HPV abnormal pap smear follow-up. And so I was like, oh wow, PCORI showed up there too in terms of when I was thinking about that. So I'm just so happy to have that idea that I think people get intimidated sometimes by large national organizations like NCCS or even PCORI, but just to really express that they are really funding and providing such really great work at like both local and national levels that I'm just really appreciative of both of you guys being here. So
thank you for telling those specific stories.
Thank you again for a wonderful panel. Seeing no hands raised or nothing, no other questions in the chat, we're going to go ahead and move on to keep us on on time as much as possible. And I'm going to turn this over now to Kimberly Richardson.
Thank you, Gina, and Shelley and Dr. Cook. I love both of you so much. Thank you so much. I'm humbled that you were here with us today. Another issue that I feel that needed to be on our agenda today is this issue around chemotherapy and the shortage that's happening across the United States and even internationally. And when I heard this gentleman speak about the chemotherapy shortage and how easily he broke that information down in easy to understand language, I was over the top trying to make sure that I was in some space with him at a SGO meeting, Society for Gynecological Oncology, where I could say, could you come to my summit? So, and he obliged me. And so I'm so grateful for this. Dr. Spencer is a practicing gynecological oncologist at the University of Wisconsin. He is the chair of the Society for Gynecological Oncology's Legislative and Regulatory Affairs Committee. His research has focused on funding and clinical trial disparities for gynecological cancer research. It is my honor to introduce and have Dr. Spencer speak with us today. Dr. Spencer, take it away.
Thank you. Kimberly, that introduction is way more than I deserve, and I appreciate that. And I feel honored to be invited to speak with you all. I also appreciate the pressure of hoping to have to convey very complex topics into a very short amount of time in a way that is understandable for all, since Kimberly said that's exactly what I was going to do. So let's be on our way on this journey. I'm going to today talk a little bit about with you what we know about the shortage briefly, some ways we might have gotten to this shortage, the things we need to fix it, and the things that we have done as a society so far, and some ways that you all, if not already engaged, may be able to engage. Next slide, please. As a society in March, we recognized that there was a pending crisis in multiple chemotherapies for gynecologic cancers. Here you'll see there are 6 of them. These ones touch our field of cancer. There are currently 15 chemotherapies that are listed in critical shortage. In March, when we learned of this, the SGO and our committee went to members of Congress who chair what's called the Congressional Cancer Caucus, the House Cancer Caucus. When we met with their staffers, they had no idea this was coming. In fact, a week after we went to meet with one of the representatives' offices, we started getting multiple messages from different offices on the Hill asking us what we knew. We had set off a chain reaction that those in the House had not known was coming until we brought it to their attention. What you'll see here is just that when we started this conversation, we were hoping we could resolve some of those issues, but we've seen it grow. And that is a major concern for us. We have decided to let what we see as outrage, and appropriately so, not just be outrage, but be a platform for us to continue advocacy now and over the coming years to make sure we have real policy solutions to the problems we're facing at this time. Next slide, please. This slide is best read probably from right to left. We are in the right side right now. We have drugs still in critical shortage that affect gynecologic cancers. There are multiple different contributing factors for that, and have been over the past couple decades. This is not the first chemo shortage, it's just the most significant one. If you go back one step to the left to those demand and supply shocks, there are so many different things that can affect how we are able to deliver chemotherapy to patients on time in the right places. A lot of what we're experiencing now, we know, is from a couple different factors. One is that we do not have the appropriate amount of raw materials to go into making chemotherapy drugs. That's one place. The other one that we've encountered recently, specifically related to the carboplatin shortage that we have ongoing, is quality assurance in the manufacturing process. And that is a major issue that we are looking towards for solutions. Next slide, please. Along with our partners at Duke who have helped develop sort of these graphics, there are 4 major S's that go into a drug supply chain resilience. What we are currently lacking in the United States. We lack resilience in our drug supply chain, and it affects chemotherapies. We need to be able to make sure we are engaging in action and policy around staffing, a highly trained workforce that is every single person committed to quality. Just like in the airline, person on the first day of work can highlight a problem and it is made known to everyone. We need to continue that mindset in the delivery of chemotherapy and cancer care. We need the appropriate amount of stuff, as I mentioned, raw materials, equipment, consumables, stock, and supply. We need the right space. We need sufficient places to manufacture those drugs. We need sufficient places to get to distribute those drugs. And we need the appropriate spaces and places to give it to patients. And we need to create high quality systems that manage quality assurance, business planning, distribution, and make sure that we have a robust supply chain in a big picture to avert these in the future. Next slide, please. I want to talk to you about how we have responded throughout the springtime and what we are doing going forward as a society. Immediately, we put out communications about what can we do for our patients when you encounter a drug supply shortage. What we found is we surveyed our society. 98% of people surveyed, when they responded, said they as a clinician have experienced a drug supply shortage and have not been able to deliver chemotherapy that they recommended to every patient every time. 60% of patients responded they had been told that they were going to experience the not being able to get their routinely prescribed drug because of this. We began dialoguing with members in advocacy groups and policy organizations. We created a webinar series to cover topics for patients, for clinicians, and how to confront these shortages, both from a on-the-ground, day-to-day delivery of cancer care perspective, but also a high-level policy, what can we do to advocate perspective. We connected providers to know what they were doing and how they were overcoming this. We created toolkits for people to use. One of the key things that was done, as we found, is we were trying to create different pathways to treat patients and do so well that insurance companies were unfamiliar with these new combinations. Even though they had been studied and tested, maybe in some cases decades ago, they were effective. Insurance companies and those doing the approvals did not recognize those because they haven't been used for so long. And so we're having to do prior authorizations above and beyond. We created insurance denial letter templates to be used for our clinicians as well. We worked with the NCCN and other organizations like Angels for Change. Next slide. This is just a part on the website. If you're interested in seeing some of these things, you can go to the tab for chemotherapy drug shortage. You will find many of these communiques. You will find information. You can see the webinars. We also broke them down not only by specific treatments, but by specific disease sites, so that people with their particular cancer might easily search. Next slide, please. We also made sure that we were out in media and social media communicating this message. We had commentary both verbally and written in CNN from our society president, Dr. Angeles Alvarez-Secor. We were quoted in the New York Times. Our president-elect, Dr. Amanda Nichols-Fader, was on MSNBC talking about these. So we made sure not only we were doing this in arenas where we could make a difference for the future, but where our message was being communicated at the moment in order to, one, create messaging for our patients and ourselves to understand where we were, but also to make sure that there was other sorts of the best types of pressures to make sure our elected officials understand the crisis that we were in. Next slide, please. And so ultimately what that led to is we were able to meet and create a House briefing along with the House Cancer Caucus. We were able to invite every single member from Congress for a briefing from the SGO in May of 23 about what we were experiencing, seeing, hearing, and what we expected over the next few months. There was also a meeting at the Energy and Commerce Oversight Committee examining root causes of drug shortages, for which we were able to contribute commentary. What this has all led to ultimately is the leadership of the House Cancer Caucus, Representatives Kelly, Kilmer, Higgins, and Fitzpatrick, have invited us to work together with them in the Duke Margolis Center for Health Policy that I showed before, to help draft legislation aimed at curbing the issues we have confronted with this chemotherapy shortage. And some of those things can deal with how do we, one, require companies who manufacture drugs to have an increased quality assurance system. We should require those places to report to the FDA sooner than they do right now in order to tell us when we are having an impending shortage. We are discussing how we ought to incentivize these organizations who create these quality systems. We ought to create a public-facing dashboard so everyone knows which drug manufacturers have these highest level of quality systems within their organization. And these are all pieces that we are working now with members of Congress to draft legislation. As I said, our goal is to take the crisis we are in and make sure that we create meaningful policy to ensure we do not confront this again. We also have different action alerts we've heard a lot about in the time I've been on the call today. How do we engage with our elected officials, both in person? We also do it electronically to make sure their health legislative aides know that our organization is engaged constantly in making sure we want to move issues forward related to the creation of policy that prevents these shortages from happening again. Next slide. I will say that I, in of myself, cannot take much credit for any of the things that I have talked to you about today in this brief time. It is a mountain of people that have mobilized this effort, including SGO executive leadership and our government relations consultants at CRD, our committee leaders, and our president and president-elect, the staff at SGO who works tirelessly, our patient advocates who we work with. I mentioned the Duke Margolis Center, and also inputs from clinical trialists and GOG partners, because clinical trials were disrupted with the shortage as well. If you aren't able to provide standard of care on a clinical trial, you can't offer that clinical trial to someone. And so we saw just how far-reaching this was for our patients, that they were also being restricted from participating in their clinical trials because of the shortage. I am very grateful to speak with you today. I'm happy to speak with anyone on this topic, not only in thinking of other ways we might move forward, but in ways that you might be able to join together and help offer your voice to this. And Kimberly, I cannot thank you enough. You are the inspiration in any relationship you and I have developed to me. So I'm so grateful to you, and I hope we can continue working together as we move forward. Thank you all.
Dr. Spencer, thank you so much for that update. This is a really good example of how our profession got caught off guard. And more importantly, our government was even less aware of a major issue. But it's also a really important highlight of how advocacy can make a difference. And while this is a little bit of a darker time in chemotherapy shortage, I just want to connect a dot for everyone in that it's not just about chemotherapy shortage. If we don't have the standard of care treatments available, that impacts clinical trials as well. There's a very tangible example. I'm opening a study with a drug in combination with an investigative drug. and I can't enroll patients on that study if I don't have the supply of the drug. So this impacts patient care on and off clinical research. And I wanted to plant that seed for a couple of reasons, because I'm super excited about our next panel, which is about clinical research and the breakthroughs that we have seen and are hoping to see coming down the road. I mentioned at the top of this summit that this is one of the very tangible things that makes me excited every day, to be able to offer new and innovative approaches to treatment for our patients and our community. As we're listening to this talk and the others to come, I want to remind everyone that towards the close of this summit, we'll have a breakout session about what we want to see addressed by Illinois State Commission on Gynecologic Malignancies. And I really want the audience to take away from what we're about to hear from these presenters and think about what we can do as a state commission about policy and other issues. So without further ado, I'm very pleased to introduce our panel. Dr. Emma Barber from Northwestern University is going to focus on endometrial cancer updates. Dr. John Maroney from the University of Chicago is going to address updates for ovarian and cervical cancers. And then we're happy to have Dr. Dario Roque back to this morning to discuss diversity in clinical trials. Speakers, I'll just ask each of you to introduce yourself at the top of your discussion. And we look, audience, if you have questions, please feel free to put them in the chat. I'll be monitoring for the speakers. Dr. Maroney, why don't we have you take it away?
Excuse me. Good morning. I think I didn't know I was first. So here we go. Let me share my screen.
And a special shout out to Dr. Maroney, who rounded and is here today.
What do you see?
Your screen,
We see slides,
but not in slide share mode.
Oh,
Perfect. Now we're seeing just switch your display settings at the very top. Second one, I think it should be say swap. Yeah, there you go. Perfect.
okay. Thank you, everybody. I'm John Maroney. I'm a gynecologic oncologist at the University of Chicago. I've been here with Dr. Lee for a number of years, and I'm excited to talk to the group. It's an incredible privilege to take care of women dealing with gynecologic cancers, and it's especially a privilege to talk with a group of interested survivors to try and help unpackage some of the details around what we can offer and why. These are my disclosures. Give me a second. So this is what I hope to talk about today. We're going to talk about novel agents, new drugs in ovarian and cervical cancer. I'm going to spend some time talking about drug classes and hopefully do so in a way that can make sense. First, we'll talk about antibody drug conjugates, abbreviated ADCs, and then something a little bit more complicated called adoptive cellular therapy, in more easy speak, cell therapy. We'll talk about cervical cancer, in particular, a relatively newly approved drug, tisotumab vedotin, and we'll talk about an investigational therapy that's pretty far along in development, a product called LN-145. And then finally, we'll end up with ovarian cancer. We'll talk about a brand new, relatively new ovarian cancer approved drug, mirvetuximab. So if we're going to talk about these drugs, it seems to me we have to consider what we're comparing them to. Sometimes that helps. So anyone afflicted with, many people afflicted with a gynecologic cancer have to get a recommendation for chemotherapy. And that works in a kind of global sense by causing damage to DNA. It works because it essentially goes after DNA within cancer cells and disrupts it. And when the DNA is critically affected, that cancer cell has to die. And anyone who's had chemotherapy could say in probably palpably, difficult terms that it also damages normal cells. Targeted therapies, on the other hand, we think of as mostly an umbrella term. For today's purpose, most times when we talk about a targeted therapy, we're referring to monoclonal antibody-based compounds. The abbreviation for that is usually MAB. The key there is that they're targeted for specific receptors on cancer cells. The goal is to target things that are specific to cancer cells and effectively minimal or not at all on normal cells. When we think about monoclonal antibodies, they have been in standard of care for many, many cancers for years. These are some examples. Many women who have to deal with targeted treatments for all different types of gynecologic cancers have seen bevacizumab. And you can see the brand name there. I'm supposed to favor generic names. That targets this thing called, it's a mouthful, vascular endothelial growth factor, or VEGF, and it's not considered an immunotherapy. Pembrolizumab, on the other hand, is the kind of index immunotherapy in like modern cancer care. And that targets something called the PD-1 receptor on cancer cells. And essentially what it's trying to do is wake up the most important army member of your immune system, the T cell, and wake the T cells up and make them kill cancer cells. The third agent that I think Dr. Barber will spend more time on is this drug lenvatinib, which attacks a different set of receptors, the VEGFR1, 2, and 3 receptors. Now, it's not an immunotherapy. This is a cartoon of a monoclonal antibody, and the key to this is that there's a specific shape to the antibody that only fits a specific shape on either the surface or the inside target of a cancer cell. If you are not a triangle, you aren't going to activate that cancer cell to make it do downstream signaling to hopefully kill cancer. Antibody drug conjugates, in comparison, are essentially that same basic molecule that's connected to something else. That something else is commonly referred to as a payload, which is essentially a sphere with a membrane inside of which is a drug that usually targets DNA. It's probably the biggest class of medicines apart from pembrolizumab-like medicines to hit cancer medicine in a very long time. And 14 have been approved in the last 9 years, 2 for gynecologic cancers, and we'll talk about them here. The way it works is a bit complicated, and I'll do what I can to try and make it make sense. The first thing is that the monoclonal antibody engages a target receptor. That whole complex then is brought within the cancer cell. The membrane, because the conditions within the cancer cell are different, dissolves, and then the payload vectors in on DNA and kills it. And then following that, we expect the cancer cell will die. This is a cartoon that hopefully makes that a little bit more clear. In the upper left, you see the green ADC attaching to the receptor of interest. It's brought inside the cell. Then it breaks up within the cell. And in the lower right, you see in blue DNA, and it goes after DNA and kills the cell. I think it's easier, and this is actually how I usually talk about it in the clinic, to think of it as a Trojan horse. So if Mr. Pitt knocked on your front door and said, I have a gift for you, what would you do? You would, of course, let him in. And he would bring with him his payload. And the unsuspecting, you wouldn't know that within the payload are a bunch of cancer-killing DNA targeting molecules. Immunotherapy is different than most antibody drug conjugates. Immune checkpoint inhibitors are, as I mentioned earlier, the most well-known. The two that get the most press are pembrolizumab and nivolumab. You see them on the road signs, you see them on the TV commercials pretty regularly. Another class of immunotherapy, essentially, again, all geared around making T cells work, are these things called therapeutic vaccines. So the idea that we could make a vaccine that itself would just completely wake up the immune system and kill cancer. That is really, at this point, more investigational and not a prime time option. The third that we'll talk about after this is cell therapy. There's 3 technologies for that. I wondered if it was a good idea to spell this out, but I am, and we're really just going to focus on one of them. The first one mentioned there, this thing called TIL therapy. So just for reinforcement, we want basically the T cells to kill the cancers. We need more of them, and we need more effective killer T cells to kill cancer. And I couldn't help myself. I just always think about more cowbell, if you've ever had that exposure to the SNL skit. So this is a very busy cartoon describing the 3 different types of cell therapies. We're really just going to focus on the one on the left. So in this situation, if you look at the upper left, you see that there's a tumor cell. You have to actually harvest the tumor from the body. You don't get it from blood. And that's done with some kind of an excisional procedure or an actual surgery. Then it goes to a special lab, and they pull sensitized T cells out of it, ones that have already seen your cancer, or not a person's cancer, and they're trying to kill it, but not winning. And then they modify those T cells and grow them into the billions. After they're grown into the many billion range, then the person gets essentially chemotherapy to minimize their immune response to reinfusion so that you don't reject the T cells. And then in the hospital, the T cells are essentially reinfused in an expanded form back into the body. Following that, a person is given some T cell stimulating medications to make the T cells essentially engraft in the body and hopefully go to town on the cancer. Moving on, the newest drug in cervical cancer to be approved is this drug tisotumab vedotin, or not the newest, but one of the newest. It is an ADC targeting this receptor called tissue factor, or TF for short, and it is standard of care. It is reasonably tolerable. It does, like chemotherapy, affect some white cells, some counts issues. It can cause some neuropathy, but most times it's not the kind of neuropathy a person experiences if they've ever dealt with the drug Taxol. And almost all drugs in this class have some effect on eyes. So that's important, because patients who have pre-existing eye issues frequently aren't particularly good matches for these drugs. It was approved in May of 2021 based on this trial that you see listed here with 102 patients. It was very active. And so it received an accelerated FDA approval, which means that basically a manufacturer is allowed to, it can be used for standard treatment in a conditional manner. Essentially, they have to have demonstrated to the FDA a plan to, in a comparison fashion, have a phase 3 trial that confirms the activity that was seen in smaller trials. So you can see the confirmatory trial on the bottom with 500 patients just a couple weeks ago appears to be positive, meaning that it has extended people's lives and it has made a difference. So we anticipate that will be presented in peer-reviewed form at a scientific meeting pretty soon. And then following that usually is an FDA decision about a permanent label or not. This TIL therapy that I described above, the agent most advanced in development is this drug L1145. It's a TIL therapy, and just to reinforce, this is how it works. They get the T cells out of an extracted tumor. They're identified, they're modified and amplified. You get some chemo, so you won't reject it. Then they're reinfused, and you get some drug called IL-2 to expand it. It was FDA approved as a breakthrough drug, which is a kind of a unique FDA approval process. In 2019, it does not have a permanent approval, but it's really just available in clinical trials right now. And within ovarian cancer, the newest drug on the scene is this drug, mirvetuximab, which is an ADC, in this case, that targets the folate receptor. What's unique about folate receptor is that it's very heavily populated on most serous ovarian cancers, that subtype, and it is absent on most normal cells. So it's easy. It's a better example of trying to target a drug to cancer and avoid normal tissues and hopefully fewer side effects. It's only in elevated form in a meaningful way in about 1/3 of ovarian cancer patients, though. So it's not for everybody. It's very well tolerated, and it was established as an active agent in these 2 trials listed at the bottom. The first one is the Soraya trial, and the second one was the Mirasol trial. And you can see that it's seen a lot of patients, and it's done very well. And it was recently reported to extend life, which I know is an odd way of describing it, but that's how we at least describe it in medical speak, living longer. And what we hope to do at some point is move that into more cures. So what's to come? We know that we have a lot of improvement that we have to achieve with the cell therapies. There are newer molecules being developed and rolled out in clinical trials all the time. And even in the time that I've been at the University of Chicago, we've rolled out at least 3 generations of cell therapy molecules within clinical trials for gynecologic cancer patients. And there are more trials coming in all of our cancers. Most of them are in ovarian and cervix. Newer and better ADCs are in development. The molecular engineering behind the payloads and the antibody specificity and the linkers is where that is based. And we're getting better at identifying which patients are going to benefit the most from this drug and help them to avoid the drug that doesn't work for them. And that's through blood testing and tumor testing. So in sum, what I feel is most important is the top line. Just to remember that there is hope. These medicines are getting better, and we're working really hard to make them more effective and less difficult to handle. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Maroney. That is such a jam-packed summary and enlightening of all of the exciting things that are coming out of clinical trial for gynecologic malignancies. And I love that you ended on hope. We're going to keep that going. I'm going to ask Dr. Emma Barber to, excuse me, from Northwestern University to take the mic, if you will, and talk us through what's in line for endometrial cancers.
Thank you so much. I'm just gonna pull this up. Look okay? Yes?
Looks great. Yep.
Looking
good. Thank you so much. So thank you so much for having me. It's been such a jam-packed and really interesting day. And I got the super lucky job of talking about endometrial cancer, which has been totally revolutionized by research really in the last year. So we have a totally new standard of care. And so that's what I'm going to be talking about today. If I can, yeah. So Dr. Maroney talked about this a little bit, but I wanted to sort of give a brief kind of high level summary of what's the difference between chemotherapy and immunotherapy. You know, before sort of the sea change in endometrial cancer recently, really chemotherapy is kind of the only thing that we had. And this new standard of care is really driven by immunotherapy. So you can see chemotherapy, it's sort of a schema of it on the left, but it basically works by killing rapidly dividing cells. So when a cell divides, it needs to, sort of take up things to divide and grow, and kind of it's going to take up the chemotherapy more quickly than a cell that's not, dividing so quickly. And then once the chemotherapy gets into the cell, it's going to kill the cell. So it's going to kill any rapidly dividing cell, a cancer cell, not a cancer cell, but we basically take advantage of the fact that the cancer grows faster. And so a lot of the side effects that come from chemotherapy come from that, the sort of effects of it killing sort of regular cells. Immunotherapy works differently than chemotherapy. So immunotherapy actually helps our body's immune system recognize and attack the cancer. And a lot of the drugs that we're going to talk about today, or that the ones that I'm talking about today, are checkpoint inhibitors that Dr. Maroney, mentioned. But basically, our body's immune system fundamentally works by figuring out which tissues are us and what are from something else, right? You get like an infection in your throat, it's a virus, it's a bacteria, that your body's not going to see that as itself, right? So it's going to know, hey, this is different. I need to attack this. This is something that's, kind of foreign. Cancer does a really good job of tricking our bodies and kind of hijacking this process and hiding, even though it's different, right? It finds a way to hide so our immune system can't detect it and can't attack it. And basically, sort of high level, these checkpoint inhibitors just reverse this. And it allows our immune system to recognize that this cancer is foreign and to attack it. And so that's, kind of more specific for the cancer because it's an other thing, but sometimes the immunotherapy can get a little bit too revved up and attack other normal parts of the body. So some of the side effects that come from immunotherapy, different than chemotherapy, but kind of understanding that basic difference in how that works helps us to understand, some of the common side effects. So I alluded to a new standard of care, which really came out earlier this year with the landmark publication of these two studies that were published at the same time in the New England Journal of Medicine, one of the top cancer journals, looking at adding immunotherapy checkpoint inhibitors, two different drugs, pembrolizumab, the study on the left, tarlimab, the study on the right, for patients that had advanced stage 3 or 4, and there's some subtleties there, but endometrial cancer. And so looking at, the very first time patients get chemotherapy, adding immunotherapy to it. So I'm going to go through these studies in a little bit of detail and then show the results, which I think are really exciting. So the first study, that one on the left, is at our GYO18, which used pembrolizumab. So you can see here, this was kind of our old-fashioned way of doing it. Everybody got chemotherapy. So the classic drugs, paclitaxel, carboplatin, and then they got the placebo in this study. They were trying to figure out, if we add immunotherapy to the chemotherapy, is it going to help it work better? Is there going to be synergistic effect? So they, instead of placebo, they obviously got the pembrolizumab. And then patients continued the immunotherapy after the chemotherapy for a little less than a year. And that was basically the study design. They did stratify it by a really important biomarker. And what we mean by biomarker is basically something that we can measure in the tumor that lets us know, is this treatment going to be more effective for a certain patient or more effective against a certain tumor? And that's something called mismatch repair deficiency. And basically, they wanted to look with this study in patients that both had mismatch repair deficiency and didn't, to see, did the immunotherapy sort of help patients more that had the biomarker. And so this is a Kaplan-Meier curve. And since I don't think we've seen any of these today, some of you may be super familiar with them, some people not as much, but it's just basically a graphic depiction of what's happening to patients over time. And this one is for PFS, or progression-free survival. So if you start on the left here, that means that everybody is cancer-free. And over time, as cancer recurs, the line kind of comes down. And we're basically comparing, how did people that got the immunotherapy, there in red, to the people that didn't, in blue. And the farther apart these curves are, basically the more effective the treatment, right? And so we see these are really far apart, right? At 12 months, 74% of the people that got immunotherapy, they were cancer-free. but only 38% of the ones that didn't. So it's a really, really big difference. Sometimes we say like a hazard ratio, and the closer to 0, the better. It was 0.3. So this is a really, really strong effect in patients that have this dMMR, the mismatch repair deficiency biomarker. It also seemed to work in the patients that didn't have the biomarker, that were mismatch repair proficient. Again, you can see those curves kind of separating. These are the people that got the pembrolizumab. These are the ones that didn't. And you can sort of see that hazard ratio there. There were, some side effects, right? But they tended to be sort of the same side effects that we see with immunotherapy and with chemotherapy. One thing that's sort of interesting that this slide is pointing out, that I think is just a kind of funny thing that we've all been observing about immunotherapy. When the immunotherapy works well, right, and it's more likely to work well in people that have that biomarker, sometimes it can work too well. Kind of the body's immune system gets too revved up and it can attack normal tissues. So in patients that have this biomarker where it's working much better, they may be more likely to have immunotherapy related side effects. And that's one thing that this study showed. Sort of the companion study, the other one that was, right next door in the New England Journal of Medicine earlier this year, was looking at a different checkpoint inhibitor, a drug called dostarlimab. Works pretty similarly, just sort of made by a different company. Some subtle differences in the patients that were included, specifically carcinosarcoma and non-measurable disease. And as we know, carcinosarcoma is a really aggressive cancer, so important to have treatment options for that. And again, they looked at placebo versus dostarlimab versus the immunotherapy. And this time they continued it for a little bit longer, up to 3 years. And again, looking at kind of what are going to be the differences, for outcomes. Really, really similar results, almost exactly the same, right? So we see the hazard ratio again, right around 0.3. These curves are really separated. These are for patients that have the biomarker of mismatch repair deficiency. For patients that don't have that biomarker, still works, but maybe not quite as well. And another big difference with this study is they also saved some of their primary outcome in the statistics for overall survival. And that's obviously, whenever we sort of do surveys and think, what do people think is important about these trials? Overall survival, how long, people are able to live, that's obviously super important. And so showing an overall survival benefit in some of the subpopulations, but I just also wanted to show in the overall population. So overall, I think this is very exciting time for endometrial cancer. There is a new standard of care. We now are including PD-1 inhibitors along with chemotherapy, so immunotherapy with chemotherapy for the first-line treatment of patients that have advanced and recurrent endometrial cancer. From the studies, we really are seeing that the benefit is most dramatic for patients that have the mismatch repair deficiency or that biomarker. So we kind of have internal debates about, about how good the benefit is in sort of both groups, but it's something that has been shown in both groups, just the magnitude is maybe better for the patients that have the biomarker. The toxicity profile really looks acceptable. There are some different side effects of immunotherapy, but they don't overlap too much with chemotherapy. And now, we can say that immunotherapy really plays a crucial role in the modern management of endometrial cancer, which is really exciting. Clearly from the data I showed today, it works way better, than chemo alone did. And so that's been a really exciting development for everyone. So thank you so much for letting me talk about some of these exciting developments. And I'd be happy to take any questions at the end. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Barber. We asked you to continue the line of hope, and you sure did. Hopefully this makes up a little bit for some of the more less thrilling information we heard about uterine cancer and patients not being heard about it. Now we have something better to offer. Our next talk is going to be about diversity in clinical trials by Dr. Roque at Northwestern University. This is a really nice transition into the discussion we're going to have after the break about disparities. So with that, I'm just going to hand it over to you, Dr. Roque.
Thank you, Dr. McLaughlin. And again, great to be here. And so yes, I'm Dr. Roque. I'm one of the GYN oncologists at Northwestern. And this is a topic that's like close and dear to my heart, because I do think that this is one of the areas in which healthcare disparities in GYN cancer delivery is most manifested. And why? So why does it matter to have diverse patients in clinical trials? So one of the main reasons, like the U.S. population is very diverse and is getting more diverse. So we just want to make sure that we are meeting the healthcare needs of everybody within the U.S. and not just a select few. The other reason is we want to make sure that all of the results that we're seeing, I mean, some of the studies that were just presented, those are literally studies and trials that have changed the way we manage patients with endometrial cancer, ovarian cancer, cervical cancer. So we just want to make sure that those treatments are actually generalizable to minority populations as well. And also take into account some of the social needs and social determinants of health that many speakers have brought up today. Dr. Cohn mentioned it earlier in her introduction, and many other patient advocates also discussed this. But if we're not having patients in trials that are actually dealing with some of these social needs and determinants of health enroll in these trials, that we actually don't have as good information in those patients. So this is one way of thinking about this. So these are, and thank you, Dr. Barber, for talking about survivor curves, because it makes this discussion a little bit quicker. But these are looking at some of those survivor curves in ovarian cancer. And this is dating back to, like, the 1970s. And you can see this is like 4 or 5 year intervals. And as you can see, so back in 1973 to 77, these are survivor curves comparing Black and white women in the US. And just kind of like survival. And you can see how the curves were pretty close together, suggesting that that there was really not a lot of disparities in terms of outcomes or survival outcomes between the two races. And then as you start to move towards the right, and then you come down like in the early 1990s and certainly now in the 2000s, now you can see how that there's a gap between the two curves, suggesting that there is actually a difference in survival. And this survival difference, it actually has nothing to do with race. Race, as we all know, is a social construct. So the reason we're seeing that survival is because the access to treatment is different. And there's many different factors as to why this is the case. Dr. Lee alluded to something earlier today when she mentioned that when we started using mammograms, that's what we started to see the difference in outcomes because of access to mammograms amongst different minority populations. And here we're seeing the same thing. And one of the reasons we see this is because precisely because of the fact that some of these patients do not have access to clinical trials. And even when these drugs are being approved, a lot of these patients are actually not able to receive them because they don't have the right insurance. They don't have access to a GYN oncologist that's aware of the new treatments that are available, et cetera. And this is also true for both endometrial cancer, cervical cancer. One of our patient advocates and survivor earlier today alluded to the big gap in survival difference between Black and white women with endometrial cancer. And it is one of the largest gaps, not only in GYN cancer, but this gap here in survival is actually larger than survival difference in breast cancer, colorectal cancer, or cervical cancer. So it is a big issue, and one of the factors contributing to this is the fact that we're not enrolling adequate numbers of Black women or Hispanic women in clinical trials. And this is the data to support this. So this is looking at studies that were sponsored by the GOG through a number of years, so looking from 1985 to 2013. And the way that the investigators looked at this is trying to figure out, well, how many patients, like white patients and Black patients with the specific types of cancer we should observe just based on incidence and population statistics. And then they looked at the number of patients. So this is that's what the expected incidence should be, right? In terms of enrollment into clinical trials. And then they looked at how many patients were actually being enrolled in clinical trials. And then they created a ratio comparing that expected versus observed. And if you look at the bottom panel here, so for ovarian cancer trials, there was a 15-fold difference in terms of that ratio, in terms of the number of white patients being enrolled as opposed to Black patients. So that is 15 times higher than it should be. Same thing for endometrial cancer, 10 times higher, cervical cancer, 5 times higher, and sarcoma trials also 5 times higher. So that was a big difference. And what was more worrisome at the time that this study was published, it was not only the fact that we know that there are significant differences across the trials, but it appeared that that difference was actually getting worse. So again, going back to the first graph here on the left is showing the enrollment by different races. So white was in blue, Black patients in this gray color, and you can see how this was true across all different trials. So only 5% of patients were Black in ovarian cancer trials, 8% in endometrial cancer trials, 20% in cervical cancer trials, and 26% in sarcoma trials. And this was true regardless of the study type, so early phase trials or observational phase 3 translational trials. So that low enrollment numbers was consistent across the board. And again, like to me, one of the most consistent issues was the fact that this problem seems to be getting worse at the time. So if you see here, so this is from 1994 to 2002. At that point, there was only 16% of Black patients enrolling in GYN cancer clinical trials. That number actually went down to 10.8% between 03 and 08, and it went further down, so almost by half, and 1/3 less, or about 1/3 of what it was earlier years between 2009 to 2013. So obviously this was a problem, and the problem itself is getting worse. This was actually a study that one of our residents actually published a study. She was very interested in looking at this issue, not only in oncology, but just across OBGYN. And she truly, one of the things about the study is that it gives me hope, because I can, it's good to see earlier OBGYNs and people that are early in their career and starting to take an interest in this kind of work, because I think it's very, very important. But what she was able to demonstrate, consistently, that there is not only underreporting, but also underrepresentation. And to me, one of the biggest issues that she found is that when looking at GYN oncology trials, we actually did the most poorly in terms of recruitment. So that is all the way here. So it's like this pink dot. So it is a big issue, and it seems to be worse within GYN oncology trials when looking at other OBGYN subspecialties. So Dr. Moroney and Dr. Barber talked about some of these trials, but I just wanted to highlight how this is a very real problem, even in some of these trials, based on which we practice GYN oncology these days. So the SOLO-1 and the PRIMA trials, so these were trials that were literally practice defining. This is the reason we use PARP inhibitors for frontline maintenance therapy in patients with ovarian cancer. And in these trials, there was no race or ethnicity data reported. That's not to say that they didn't enroll patients that were non-white, but because it was these were international trials, it was very hard to track different demographics categories across different countries. But certainly there was no race or ethnicity data reported, which I think is a big issue. Looking at the Keynote trial, so these are some of the trials that led to the approval of pembrolizumab and lenvatinib for endometrial cancer. Over 90% of patients in these trials were white. The innovative 204 trial that Dr. Moroney alluded to that led to the approval of tisotumab vedotin for cervical cancer. The majority of those patients were white, and as if you recall, there was only about 104 patients. So the majority of those patients were white and mostly enrolled in Europe. So what are some of the potential barriers? I mean, certainly there's historical factors. We all know about the Tuskegee syphilis study, as well as, Henrietta Lacks and the HeLa cell line, and how that was essentially unethical research that have been done for many, many years. There's also socioeconomic factors. I mean, lack of transportation or inadequate or underinsurance. Many patients just do not have the adequate insurance, and they do not receive care because of that. Sometimes these clinical trials require a lot of commitment from the patients in terms of the number of lab works that needs to be done, the number of visits, the pre-screening phase. Some of our trials that we have open right now require overnight stay in the hospital for sometimes 1-2 nights, and that can certainly overlap with some of the other balancing or demands that patients have in terms of childcare or elderly care, their work expectations. So it might be very, very hard for patients to actually be able to enroll in these trials. The social cultural factors, language barriers being one of the predominant ones. We are not great at creating consents in multiple languages so that we are able to enroll a more diverse patient population. And then there's like the structural factors, and Dr. Cohen alluded to this earlier on about some of the very restrictive eligibility criteria in some of these trials, and how many of these trials are often at large academic medical centers that might not be accessible to, for example, more rural populations. There's also a lot of restrictions in terms of, sometimes many minority patients may have more medical comorbidities, and that will make them also ineligible for clinical trials. And that is something that is good to hear, Dr. Conde. It's being worked on at the NCI level. So how do we increase clinical trial inclusion? So it is a multifactorial approach. So it certainly starts or should include leadership engagement at the institutional level, at the cancer center level, and making sure that there is buy-in from our department heads, the heads of the cancer centers, et cetera. Also providing engagement. This has been consistently demonstrated as one of the most influential factors to help patients enroll in clinical trials, just for providers to actually offer them to patients and not make assumptions about patients not being interested in being enrolled in the trial. Community engagement, and this is something that I'm very proud to be working with Kimberly Richardson and some of other patient advocates in the Chicago area, just to make sure that patients are aware and patient advocates are aware of how to access clinical trials, how to determine whether or not patients are eligible for them. Having recruiters and nurse navigators or community healthcare workers that can help patients navigate this system. Patient engagement as well. I encourage many of my patients to try and ask themselves if they're eligible for a clinical trial. And as patient advocates, if you work with other patients or even as survivors, if you have people that you mentor, encouraging them to always ask if there is a clinical trial available, because it truly should be the standard of care if one is available for these patients. And then trying to overcome some of these structural barriers, such as access to transportation, et cetera. And one of the ways that I'm trying to work on, and is through this program, it's called Impact Chicago. This was it's a small, very local program that I'm collaborating with Kimberly Richardson, and it's a program that is trying to collect all of the different clinical trials that are available for GYN within Chicago and some of the Chicago suburbs. So as a way to centralize, it's like a database so that patients and providers are able to access those trials and trying to figure out what is available, so that it's easier to navigate than the resources that are out there right now. I'm sure many of you have gone to clinicaltrials.gov. It's a very, very difficult system to navigate. So the goal of Impact Chicago is not only to reduce the number of trials that patients will need to look at, because it's only going to show the trials that are available within the Chicago region. But a component of this is also providing patients with transportation assistance so that they can actually go to the appointments or be able to attend the trial infusions, et cetera. And then we'll have a nurse navigator that will be dedicated in helping patients understand the eligibility criteria and try to help direct patients to the right site where the trial is open. So for example, if someone is being treated at Northwestern, but there is a trial that they qualify for and it's open at University of Chicago, helping them get there, getting them in touch with the right people. And this was a project that is supported by Bears Care Foundation, and we're very proud of launching it and hopefully growing it further in the next few years, and hopefully include other cancer sites such as breast and colon. And that's all I have.
Thank you, Dr. Roque. I am so excited about the initiative that you and Kimberly are collaborating on. I can corroborate that each of our expert panelists, excuse me, that talked this morning are all very dedicated to this, and we have informal networks to try to get patients to the clinical trials that they can benefit from within the city. But it's nice to see a structured collaboration in the making. Thanks to each of our panelists for this session. So much science packed in, and each of these papers we talked about could have their own symposium. So I'm very appreciative to each of you for breaking it down for us today. We are going to defer a Q&A session in the interest of time and in the interest of a 5-minute break. And then we will come back.
I'm going to say
Yes,
we
ma'am.
could probably even like shift our break and keep going, because I know we want to try to end by 12:30. So we're going to actually jump into a quick raffle. Those who need to stand up, turn off your camera for a bit, listen in. And so I'll hand it over to Aaliyah for a quick raffle, and we'll keep it going. And we hope to close out by 12:30. We really appreciate everyone staying in, for those who can, to the breakout session, so we can capture your voices for our Illinois State Commission on GYN cancers.
Hi, everyone. So for our raffle prizes today, we pre-pulled the names just in the interest of time. So we are raffling off, our first raffle prize is a $100 Visa gift card, and that is going to Kamali Chandler. And I apologize if I'm mispronouncing anyone's name here. Kamali Chandler, you've won our $100 Visa gift card. And then we have two QBs, and that's the photo included here. QB is an under-desk elliptical. As someone who has used them myself, really a great prize. And those are going to, we have two QBs to raffle off. The first one is going to Dawn Keeley. Dawn Keeley is the first QB, and the second one is going to Andrea Williams. Andrea Williams has won the second QB, and the QBs and the $100 Visa gift card, we're sponsored by the Office of Community Engagement and Cancer Health Equity at the University of Chicago Comprehensive Cancer Center. So congratulations to all of our raffle winners, and I will be emailing you using the email address that you registered for the summit. I'll be following up via email to get addresses where we can send those prizes to. And so we're going to move into our next part of the summit. And it is a panel discussion, perspectives on disparities in gynecologic cancer. Dr. Neetha Lee is our moderator, and I believe she needs no introduction at this point. So Dr. Lee, you can go ahead and take it away from here.
So much. I don't want to, I know that everyone's time is valuable. We've just had such great information. I'm going to let our panelists speak for themselves. And I think what I wanted to emphasize was, you know, we really do understand that like not all GYN cancers or all cancers at all are experienced the same way. So we understand that there are differences based on who you are, maybe your age, your maybe race and ethnicity, maybe language, as Dario mentioned, maybe where you live, how close are you to a hospital or to a cancer center, maybe, you know, so these differences in age, race and ethnicity, language barriers, health literacy, or even things such as rural versus more urban centers can really make a big difference in terms of the type of insurance you have. So unfortunately, we know those are the reality of it. So I really would appreciate our wonderful panelists, Ms. Rebecca Esparza and Ms. Rolanda McKee. I'll hand it off to you, Rebecca, first to speak, and then we'll have Rolanda speaking as well. I'll have you guys introduce yourselves. Thank you.
All right, thank you so much, Kimberly, for the invitation to join everyone today. And I am Rebecca Esparza. I live in Corpus Christi, Texas, and at age 30 in 2001, I was diagnosed with ovarian cancer. It was supposed to be routine surgery just to remove fibroid tumors, and when I woke up, I slowly learned over the next few days that not only did I have ovarian cancer, but they had to do an emergency radical hysterectomy, and I had not had the chance to have children. So I'd like to point out that they don't do that anymore. I'm proud to say that they do not do that, even if the doctor feels like they're trying to save your life. And that's what my doctor told me, is that I was just trying to, save your life. But the biggest shock, or the biggest hurdle to overcome at my diagnosis, was the fact that I did not have health insurance. I had just started a freelance business, and that was something that I had to navigate and understand, and try to feel out how you get treatment for your cancer with no health insurance. So it was a big struggle, and obviously I got the treatment that I needed, but I had to declare myself indigent, and there were lots of hurdles and bumps in the road throughout my treatment that I had to encounter. Basically, the main reason I do what I do today is I've heard it coined before as the obligation of the cured. Ovarian cancer is one of the toughest out there and most chemo-resistant types of cancers out there, and I responded pretty quickly. Not to say that I have not had my medical issues, and I still have medical issues today, but I'm here. I'm here, and I am not going to stay silent about what has happened to me, because again, there are many different adversities and difficulties that I've encountered along the way, but I share my story to prevent others from going through what's happened to me. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Rolanda, if you want to say a few words there, and then we'll keep going to hear more from you.
Hello, my name is Rolanda McGee. I am coming to you all from Oakland, California.
Okay.
I am an ovarian cancer survivor. Up until I began doing patient advocacy, I really didn't know much about ovarian cancer, and I was diagnosed 2 days prior to my 50th birthday. And when I was diagnosed, I just went with the flow. I didn't know how to advocate for myself. So I went through my 6 chemotherapy treatments and my surgery, just trusting my oncology team. And there was no one really giving me any insight about what was going on, what was going to happen through everything that I experienced, all the trauma that my body experienced, and also, post-treatment, like what was going to happen with me. I knew nothing. And I always thought I was stage 1C. I don't know where I got that from. I just told myself that. And I found out I was stage 3C, and it was more serious than I thought. And I'm just thankful to be here. And I also thank Kimberly, because Kimberly has opened my eyes so much to this work, and I truly appreciate that.
Thank you both. I think what I'd like to hear is your thoughts on, like, how important do you think it is to have different forms of diversity in this advocacy space, right? I think you both mentioned your really important personal experiences that brought you here, and thinking about how best can we support more patients to become advocates, especially from diverse perspectives, whether that's, again, like I said, there's like a whole range of different ways that we can think about the diversity of experience we have. So what are either of your thoughts on how do we support more people getting involved and more patients taking on these roles when they feel that they are ready?
I'll jump in real quick. I think it's reaching out to folks and getting the word out, because I think the majority of people that go through experiences like this don't realize that there's a whole world out there where they can elicit change. And just, trying to beat the drums, as you will, just getting out there and letting people know that we need their voice. Another thing to do is try to examine what are the barriers that are keeping people from participating. I know in the Hispanic community in particular, I still attend, unfortunately, conferences today where I am one of maybe 2 or 3 Hispanics in a room full of 200 advocates. And that is very disheartening. But I know that one of the barriers that exists for Hispanics in particular is that we are very family-based. And a lot of the advocates that I know that are Hispanic are basically not interested in leaving their family. Even if it's for a 3-day conference, they're like, who's going to take care of my kids? I don't trust anybody to take care of my kids for 3 days. I'm just not going. So how do we break down those barriers to, there's so many more than that, but that's the main one that I've encountered. And also just getting the word out that we need their voice, and, you know, whatever we could do as organizations to help them to participate, whether it's shortening the time that they have to be gone, or I don't know what kind of other solutions that we can come up with, but there's got to be something that we could do to help engage the Hispanic community more.
Those are really excellent points, and thinking about how we can kind of design local initiatives that mirror maybe what's happening at a national level, what comes to mind, and then also better utilize like technology. Like, unfortunately, we've all gotten used to Zoom, and making sure people can have access to even things like that. So Rolanda, what are your thoughts in terms of like both the importance and like what you think of as like ways that we can kind of like really kind of do kind of in some ways what you were mentioning too, that you kind of went through this process about?
Like Rebecca spoke about the Hispanic community not trusting anything, the Black community doesn't trust the healthcare system itself. And I think by doing a lot of community engagement is very important to get the word out. I know in my advocacy here in California, it's very hard to find spaces where people look like me. And so, and it's mainly because no one trusts anything. As someone stated earlier, like the Tuskegee experiment, the Henrietta Lacks, what happened with her, the Black community, there's a historical distrust of the medical field. And the only time that we really go in is when there's something like it has to be, we're at the last straw, there's nothing, you know, all the home remedies, everything is just not working. So we have no choice but to go trust the doctor who barely sees us. When I was diagnosed, I was misdiagnosed in September of 2013. I was misdiagnosed with diverticulitis. I know my body. I'm like, that is not what's going on. I was trying to explain there's something else. And I really had to go to my OBGYN doctor to even get an ultrasound. And from that, everything just went forward. But I think community engagement, making the Black community, building that trust, and just making them aware that it's more than just breast cancer, and there's more than prostate cancer in our communities, and building that trust, doing community events, and allowing them to see people like us, people of color, who are able to be the voice for the voiceless, I'll say.
That was a really fantastic summary. I really appreciate both of you and all of the survivors who are here, and the generosity of really sharing your stories that are so personal and yet using that for such important work. We're going to quickly shift now to our breakout sessions to be able to make sure that we go forward with that. We will also be after that having a summit evaluation. So I'm going to turn it to Kimberly to go over this very quickly, but since it's a small group, we're going to divide into groups and get some work done so that we can take it back to our legislators.
Thank you, Dr. Lee. As some background information, we actually started this campaign for this commission at our very first gynecological summit. We created a call to action to our state legislators, and 3 years later, you know, democracy works slow. We have established this Illinois Special Commission on Gynecological Cancer. We have several of the commissioners on this call with us today, and the purpose for these breakout sessions are super important. It does not matter if you're not from the state of Illinois. If you are a cancer survivor, a care partner, a physician or a researcher or cancer trainee, what we're looking for in our breakout sessions are to get information that will help to support the work of this commission, that we will be able to influence the state legislature to do some redistribution of funds as it relates to cancer in whole. We are an unscreenable cancer. Most of the gynecological cancers are unscreenable. We need to find ways to change how research is funded so that we become one of those screenable cancers like lung, breast, colorectal, and prostate cancer. So the purpose of our commission is, as you can see, is to increase awareness, to improve our data collection on gynecological cancers, to improve that delivery of care to all patients diagnosed with cancer, and that these cancers, of course, include all of the gynecological cancers: ovarian, vaginal, vulvar, cervical, and uterine. So we're going to move quickly. Please give us your feedback. We're going to put you into breakout rooms either for diagnosis, treatment, and survivorship, or you're going to be in a breakout room regarding early screening and risk reduction. And so that breakout room information is going to pop up on the screen. And we're going to spend about maybe 10 or 15 minutes and then come back just to close out. Please participate. What we want is the patient experience or your experience in general to help guide the work of this gynecological commission. On behalf of every commissioner on the call today and our state legislator, thank you for participating.
Okay, so hopefully it should have popped up, join a breakout room. And I believe people should be able to choose their own breakout rooms between diagnosis, treatment, and survivorship, and early screening and risk reduction. Okay, I got a message saying that someone has not seen the option to join the room. Let's see.
Yeah, I'm also not seeing myself.
Let's see.
Yeah. Can you?
Okay. I'm not sure. All right, sorry. So I know
All right,
Cheska.
yeah. I think it'll close in 12 and then I'll redo it. 12 seconds.
Okay.
1 second. Sorry, everybody.
Oh, what happens?
Okay. So now, okay, everyone should be able to choose their room.
Sorry, where do we choose our rooms?
It's not working.
Okay, would you, so let's see.
Okay,
You know which room you'd like to be in, because I can just assign you to one of them. Do you want to be in diagnosis, treatment, survivorship, or early screening?
I'd like to be in diagnosis, treatment, and survivorship, please.
Put you in that room right now.
Thank you.
Is anyone else having an issue? Andrea Williams, 1, please. Okay, Andrea Williams, you're in. If anyone else is having an issue joining a room, you can unmute yourself and let us know which room you'd like to be in, or put it in the chat box. I think, Cheska, for the remaining, we can just
That's fine. Okay. Does look good?
Andrea, it says that you are in the diagnosis treat, the first group already. I'm going to join that as well.
General practitioners much more aware of gynecological cancers and the commonalities of gynecological cancer symptoms with other.
So the first question that they wanted us to pose to the group was, what are some barriers that you can think of for early detection and screening, whether they're structural, individual, or patient barriers? I think this has been a little bit echoed throughout the conference, but any major ones that stuck out to you guys?
Hi, this is Elizabeth, and I'm sorry, Kamali, go ahead.
No, go ahead, Elizabeth, go ahead.
Well, apologies, I switched to a new computer and my live video is not working, so what you see is what you get there. Anyway, I joined this room because I could have gone to the other one. I am an 8-year-plus ovarian cancer thriver myself, but educating all humans and being really proactive is just really one of my passions. I do participate with Pal Drescher. I want to disclose that. I'm here in the Seattle area. And so I love being a voice for research and so forth. But for me, it is one human, one heartbeat, one breath at a time, and really speaking about this and being transparent, using the word cancer, using the word possibilities, and helping people get to resources. I had the privilege and honor of being an ovarian and breast health educator, and I did that long before I had my own diagnosis. Lucky me. Anyway, I think there's so many potent ways that we overlook. I was so struck a few moments ago, and speaking about the Hispanic community just as an example, but I think that cultural factors and structural factors are so important. And it occurred to me, how is it that we could provide at conferences childcare resources? How in our community can we provide better childcare resources as survivors, thrivers, to connect this way? And across the board, and with our Black and brown brothers and sisters, our LGBTQI plus community, etc. So there are many other things I could say, but I'm going to zip right now so others can. So Kamali, go ahead.
I think the question was about different barriers that I may have encountered, so I would say one of the biggest hurdles, if you want to call it a hurdle, is the simple fact that I just didn't know that there was no screening. It never dawned on me that there were 5 gynecologic cancers. And I am actually, I like to think I have a pretty basic and good grasp on the human anatomy. It just never dawned on me that there were these 5 gynecologic cancers. And it just, for me, I thought I'm going to my gynecologist every year the way I'm supposed to. I'm getting a pap smear every year the way I'm supposed to. I'm good. It just never dawned on me that there was no screening. Again, that there are these other gynecologic cancers, and B, that there is no actual screening for them. That's still boggles my mind. And I think that if there was, well, I'm going to stop there. So I'll
Well, I
ask
hear
you
both of you saying we need to talk about it. And in that, my question in thinking about action is who's that audience? What's the audience that we need to talk to and with? And I'm also hearing a theme about stigma. There's stigma associated with the cancer. We heard that when some of our survivors were talking about cervix cancer and uterine cancer, and I know I encounter stigmas about girl parts and et cetera. What are some of the specific things that we can address and where and how,
I feel like maybe educating the general practitioners a little more, because I told my internist, I'm afraid I have ovarian cancer. I'm bloating. I'm not eating that hardly anything, and I'm bloating, and and I'm Ashkenazi Jew, and I have had my first kid after 35. I have some of these risk factors, and he didn't take it seriously and for 2 years. So, and 2 times I had to bring that up, and I feel like he should have got, right away, at least done a CA 125 and see what that led to, and maybe a scan if that was elevated, but none of that happened. And my OBGYN had retired, and then there was COVID and all craziness. But so with me, it was sort of the perfect storm. But I feel like if the general practitioners were more educated, that would be extremely helpful.
I see Gina mentioned community health workers and having those folks be advocates. That's another opportunity for education to the community and to help shepherd folks towards healthcare. But then we want the healthcare providers to hear you, see you. Have others had the experience are there different experiences with different kinds of providers, generalist, family versus OBGYN? Because the education is different, and I actually don't know much about the education for other things outside OBGYN.
Well, I can speak to that just from my own perspective, is that my primary care doc at the time had known me for over 20 years professionally and as a patient. And at my advanced age, she even said, "Oh, you're too healthy," when I presented the differences in what was going on, because I did have a history of diverticulosis and enolitis, and I knew it was very, very different. And so, being the big mouth advocate that I am for myself and what I wish for all women and all humans, is I said, no, this is wrong. And I did not just insist, I demanded to have an, transvaginal ultrasound and so forth. So, it's really potent to advocate for yourself and to understand, I think, with primary care docs, how they are squeezed from both sides, and demand that they're respectful and that they listen to you. And even if they don't believe you, say, okay, you may not think that something's going on. I do. I live with myself 24/7. So please, let's check this out. And if you're not willing to, then I would like to see someone else. And that said, I brought this up one time, and it's not always easy for people to switch providers for whatever reason.
Yeah.
Yeah.
They don't know. Most of my patients don't have choices. I hear these stories
exactly
on the wrong end of things when the cancer's already there. And they don't really have choices of who their PCP is.
Can there be some kind of checklist? I tend to see that doctors will give you an extra few minutes during that very first appointment that you have with them as a new patient. Could there be some kind of checklist that you go over, and not only as a screening, let's say, but also just as a mini education kind of, do you know that there are 5 gynecologic cancers and there is no screening for the other 4? And here's a little, like every September for Ovarian Cancer Awareness Month, I print up these little cards, 3x5, and I hand them out to people on the street, and it says exactly that. There's no screening, and here are the symptoms. Sorry, the sun decided to make a guest appearance, and I'm renovating my apartment, so everywhere I go is a mess or some kind of tool. Anyway,
It's like
so if they could just have that, something like that in the waiting room, as well as have that conversation with a new patient during that very first intake. So at least, you know, I want to believe that a couple of lives will be saved that way.
I love that idea. I have some thoughts, but Kayla, I'd love to hear from you about what that brings to mind for you.
Well, no, I agree. I think having more information, especially like what I think you're getting at is some of the limitations of screening. Because you know you did all the right things, and you think like, okay, I'm good, everything that we are able to test for checks out, without much education about the things that we're not able to test for. And so you know, I think that's a pretty novel idea. I can't think of very many OBGYNs that automatically broach the subject of maybe things to look out for, even without you know, initiating, or without patients like having some symptoms already. But some sort of like educational material to be available, you know, makes
You know, there's this has nothing to do with gyn cancer, but my daughter was recently diagnosed with asthma, and the state of Illinois requires every patient with the diagnosis of asthma to have an asthma action plan. And it's standardized and it's color coded, and and that's that's something that can be done and standardized and give us a metric to hold folks accountable.
It doesn't cost, I would assume doesn't cost, there's no real cost to it. We're not implementing a new machine or a new type of medicine. It's just an extra 1.5 minutes of, you know, talking with your patient and letting them know that. And again, having something up in a waiting room, you know, we're all sitting there, may as well just take that opportunity to educate your patients. It'll help them also, because then we're all working together as a team. Especially when, as to Elizabeth's point, they're being pulled, the medical providers are being pulled in so many different directions, and they're crunched for time as well. I know that. And one really quick thing, and I know that before in the main room, someone spoke to Black and brown people. You know, I come from a community in the Hispanic world where you just don't question, and please forgive me for, you know, the racial, you just don't question white people. White people know everything, and they're the doctors. And so whatever they say is, they must be right, because they're white. And listen, I work with white people, my clients are white. So my stepfather was white. So it's not a Black or white thing necessarily, but just
it kind of is.
It is, yeah.
We own that. Like, I'll speak on behalf of all white providers. We own it, and if we don't, we're part of the problem.
It's just, I don't know if many people of color even feel comfortable questioning.
Right.
Let alone just even going to the doctor. You know, I'm young enough not to have experienced a lot of the 60s and segregation and all that. So a lot of those things won't necessarily, you know, the Muskegee, I know it through history, but not necessarily because I have ancestors who went through it or anything like that. No. I just think I come from a culture where we just don't question the doctor, which tends to be a white man. And I will say that also goes for women. We're just really not questioning.
Mm-hmm.
Well, and that's how we run into trouble with women with uterine cancer not getting diagnosed when they've been complaining about bleeding for ages. Like Dr. Dahl has provided us that data. Okay, we only have a few minutes left, but I do want to ask the question of where can we put this checklist besides healthcare? Because if we want to get to the communities who don't go to the doctor.
Social media.
Okay. Lots of campaigns.
Human resources, like whether it be like the EBT programs or Medicaid versus Medicare. Medicare is for older people, correct?
Yeah, that's
so just
so you're
there
through the insurance providers. Okay. So dementia, yes, I love that idea. So that still leaves some vulnerable populations who maybe don't have insurance or are not registered citizens or residents.
I would
in our life.
these days have these wellness programs, like Facebook, for instance, right? They'll have targeting the younger generation, they'll have these wellness programs that maybe you could collaborate with them and have
through employers. Right. Yeah, like you could hit up the largest employers, because even just getting that can help get into the community by filtration. Oh my gosh, I love these ideas. Tristan, you're suspiciously quiet.
Well, you know, I'm a transgender man from Canada, 20-year ovarian cancer survivor, so I come with a lot of dynamics. But I also wanted to just express my appreciation for letting me be here. Thank you.
You know, I say we put the checklist everywhere where humans gather, really, you know, community centers, Planned Parenthood, any place where there are healthcare providers, health organizations within communities, you know, and thank you, Kamali, for bringing that up. I think it's just very powerful.
Thank you so much, everyone, for being here. We will be sharing all of this information. We'll synthesize it. Again, remember the Summit's resource swag bag. Please plan to share this with someone you know and love, whether it's your own doctors or your friends and family and everything else like that, just as so much of the theme has been raising awareness and really advocating for GYN cancers.
Use your cell phones on your photo to scan the QRC code for all the things that are in the virtual swag bag.
And again, our next steps, our 5th annual next year, we're going to start planning now. We're going to have a hybrid meeting, both back in person and virtual. We'll be sending announcements and emails. Commission hearings will be public and shared. Check out the swag bag. If you are interested in getting involved, please email us. We will send out an email again. We have an evaluation. Cheska, if you want to throw that out there right now. And if you can click on the evaluation summit, that would be great, because we need all the help we can to prove what we need to do, and also to share this in other ways. So if there's any way that you guys can share all of this, and we'll be sending out other ways that people can share some of the smaller pieces that have been done together. Kimberly, last to you.
Oh, just everyone, thank you so very, very much. Please use the evaluation. It gives us a sense of what everyone wants to know about, what patients need to hear and get educated about. I am appreciative of everyone who joined us today. Thank you to all of the panelists, all of the presenters, and to you for joining us on Saturday. You had a lot of choices, but you hung on in there with us. So we do appreciate you. Have a wonderful rest of your day.
Thank you all so very much. Can you email the QR codes? Clicking on my iPad is not working. Yes, I believe Cheska will be able to send that to everyone who was in the link. So Cheska, maybe at the end we can send it back to people. Is that right? Or I don't know.
I can email everyone that registered for the event for the summit evaluation, as well as the swag bag. So look out for that.
Thanks again, everyone. I wish we could even catch up more with everyone who's on here. So
Jessica, can you put it back on the screen real quick? Thank you.
It's not a long evaluation, but it really helps us out.
All right, perfect.
Something's happening somewhere. Sorry, Kimberly, I can't hear you.
All right. If you finish the evaluation, feel free to leave. Feel free to leave the meeting. Thank you for your participation.
Jessica, that would be yes. You texted me. All right. Congratulations. Great job, guys. Thank you, thank you, thank you.